We'll go from there. Hey everyone, thanks for being here. This is the Small Council, which you have Saturdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe, consider becoming a YouTube member, hitting that join button, supporting us that way. If you enjoy getting that content 7 nights a week, also come around and for your live thing when we do this, right? We'd love to see you. So stop by the Twitch channel. Okay, I'm gonna introduce my amazing guests, right? And we'll go from there. We'll start with Black American Made. Bam is back here with us. Probably actually the wrong nationality for this particular topic, but you'll suffice. Bam, how are you?
I am doing pretty good. I have, it's been a nice little weekend. I didn't think that I thought you were full. Like it was kind of like last minute when I seen you throw me in the group. I was like, oh crap, this is happening still. Okay, cool. But no, I'm super excited to be here. Fun topic. Well, I wouldn't say it's a fun topic, I guess, but should be an interesting conversation.
Yeah. All right. Next, we have a new person, Franklin and Slash. Hello. Hi. Nice to meet you. You were introduced by our mutual friend over here. So please tell myself and the world about yourself.
Hi, I'm Franklin and Slash. I stream sometimes. Most of the time, I'm a lawyer in Canada. I do family law and also wills and estates. I've done criminal law. I've done a ton of different areas of the law because we kind of practice with every area. So I'm super excited to talk about this topic. I can bring all of the useless stuff I learned in law school finally to an audience of many people that will really enjoy it. But yes, I mostly talk about why the law is terrifying.
Okay, thank you. All right. And then the mutual friend I was talking about, our friend Not So Erudite. Erudite's back with us. Hooray! Like, if I had fanfare music, I'd play it right now. Erudite, thank you for joining us. And you've got like a different camera? What's going on here?
Yeah, I got my new camera installed. And so you get to see me in 4K finally.
Why is it fisheye though?
Oh, I can change that. Do you not want it fisheye? I just think fisheye is fun because I can go like this to the camera and it looks spoopy. But I can change it.
No, I mean, it's fine. No, I mean, you can do whatever you want.
She's a surrealist.
I've never particularly been a fan of fisheye, just in general. Like anytime someone does fisheye, I'm like, you could have easily done that without that. There's like there's two settings where you need it, right? Like literally under the water. Maybe
it makes me think of Missy Elliott and Bust Around music video in the early 2000s.
Yeah, horrible. I think me turning on fisheye is the equivalent of professors during COVID turning on the background so that their like face keeps blurring out and there's like autumn leaves like half on their face. Yeah, I think that's what fisheye is to me. It's my new boomer outpouring.
But thank you for stopping by once again, Erudite. All right. Next we have Layman. Layman is back with us. Happy to have him here, right? The one who really can't stop making expressions on his face. Layman. No, it's good. No, you're very expressive, right? You know, it's you make a fantastic mind. So
awesome.
Thank you. Thanks for being around.
Yeah, thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Layman. I talk about a lot of different stuff. I find these panels really fun. Prime invites me on them a lot, so that's pretty fucking cool. And I love talking about Canadian politics, and it's not often an opportunity to talk about that stuff on this platform, so it's really, really cool to be doing that. I've been Canadian politicsing like crazy this week because the front runner to lead the Conservative Party was hosting a rally in my area. His name's Pierre Poilievre, and I actually got to meet him, and we actually had like a debate for 2 minutes about housing and stuff. So it was actually pretty cool. I'm actually to the right of him on housing, which is really funny. But anyways, yeah, it was fun. So I'm all amped up. I'm fired up. I'm ready. Let's fucking go.
Layman is a conservative on housing. He's like, kick those poors to the curb. They don't have my rent money, right?
Yeah.
It's like, but
Yeah.
first we got to break their
Whites
legs so
only.
they'll know
Wow.
better next time. All right, gotcha. All right, no problem. We love our slumlords. All right, Corey Campbell is here. Corey Campbell, back with us. Nice to see you. We had a lot of fun with you last time. It was like less than a week ago, I think, or maybe exactly.
It was exactly a week ago.
Exactly a week ago. Okay, great. Yeah, I know time. So Corey, thank you for coming through.
Yeah, thank you so much. Super grateful that you reached out again, and super also grateful to be here with everyone else on the panel, as well as you, Prime, for sure. And this is, I think, a super fitting story because, well, I literally covered this story on my own stream, and I also just have been recently been covering psychedelic research also on my own stream. I'm a biochemist, and on my stream I cover science, research, a little bit of politics. I do the occasional fitness stream, and yeah, super grateful to be here and to get into it.
All right. Next, we have last username. He's here with us once again. All right. Like, happy days are here again. Last username. One of my favorites, honestly. Right? Not for his opinions, right? Just for his smile.
Not the favorite.
Well, I mean, I have so many great choices. I mean, Erudite's here, so like I don't want to lie. So last username. Thanks for being around.
Getting competitive already. Hey, how you doing? I am last username. I would be Canadian if I wasn't a post-national anarchist, liberal anarchist. And I would be the expert if there wasn't a damn Canadian lawyer here. So I'm just, I guess I'm just last username.
What do you mean you're not a Canadian? Do you live off the grid?
No, I live under the boot of Justin Trudeau.
Oh no. True Daddy?
Okay, thank you for that. Next, we have Polite Pan just in time, all right?
Yeah, so, hi everyone. Sorry I'm late. I was heavily intoxicated, so I couldn't get here in time. Luckily, I can use that as a defense now. Yeah, let's get right into it.
He's the best. I love him. All right. And last but not least, our Dark Lord and Savior, Doobie, is back with us. Doobie, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Okay. So now, longtime viewers of this channel will know that this is an odd configuration for me, right? I've made very clear my disdain for Canadians, but I'm fucking surrounded by them now. But well,
you'll be happy to know. Sorry to interrupt. I'm Quebec. I'm a Quebecer, so technically we're not Canadian.
You're Canadian, literally everyone's size.
If you could separate him from the rest of us, like just different panel, that would be great.
We want to be separated from the rest of you.
But just know, if you're separated, we will not financially contribute to your well-being. So
no, we're still gonna ask for money.
We're gonna tariff the shit out of you, and we're gonna put sanctions on you. It's gonna be awesome.
You guys ready for basically patriotic jokes, but way less funny because they're Canadian jokes?
Yeah,
that's what it's gonna be.
So this is gonna be fun. We're talking about a Canadian issue, right? So I invited literally all the Canadians that I know, right? And I found out that I know too many. So we'll get started. I'll read the topic. The Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that defendants accused of violent crimes such as homicide and sexual assault can use self-induced extreme intoxication as a defense. Previously, there was a prohibition to this type of defense due to a federal law from 1995, which was supported by women's advocacy groups. Do you think this is a fair ruling? Should people be held less responsible for their actions when they are intoxicated? Since a significant amount of sexual assaults revolves around intoxication, does this make victims more vulnerable? Okay. Yeah, so this just happened, this ruling, like maybe like a week or two or something like that. But anyway, it happened very recently, and I think the implications of it are pretty fascinating. It touches on a lot of subjects that we've talked on before, because we talked a lot about assault, unfortunately, right? So I wanted to take this chance to talk about these things, and especially how alcohol and responsibility relate very directly. Despite my order, I'm actually going to go to Franklin first, because he's our Canadian lawyer. Could you give us your intro, your first initial thoughts into all this, please?
Okay, so if we're dealing with whether this is a correct decision, You have to understand that when you're dealing with a criminal offense, you have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms that exists in Canada. It is not the same as the American Constitution. We do not have Miranda rights. We do not have a First Amendment. We have other provisions that deal with those issues. So what happens is, in some circumstances, a defense that you can throw forward is that the charge itself, the section of the criminal code, is unconstitutional. So in order to do that, you have to find a provision in the charter, which you would cite. Normally it'll be section 7, section 8, section 9, section 10, etc. In this case, it was section 7, which is our right to life, liberty, and security of person, to not be infringed with the principles of fundamental justice. The principles of fundamental justice were created in other decisions, and the concept basically boils down to, here's a list of things we wouldn't want to be part of the law. So we wouldn't want a law to be arbitrary. We wouldn't want a law to be vague so that you couldn't understand it. You wouldn't want, and this is the important one here, a law to create an offense for something that you do involuntarily. Because at that point, you didn't commit the actus reus. In fact, the actus reus was done and you didn't do it. We're going to get into what that means. But it was, that standard was looked at in the case of RV Parks, which dealt with a person that was sleepwalking, drove 27 kilometers to his parents' house and stabbed them multiple times, and was found not guilty because he was acting as a non-insane automaton because of his severe sleepwalking. So that case is in the back of your memory when you're dealing with this case, which obviously RV Davio was the original thing that deals with this, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, so that's section 7. There's also 11D, which is the presumption of innocence. Here, you are in fact reversing the onus and saying, if you get intoxicated, you have the mens rea from getting intoxicated, and therefore you have the mens rea, which is the mental element, to do every other offense that you're about to do. We don't want that standard necessarily. Now, this is for specific or general intent offenses as opposed to specific intent. So if I'm committing a murder, I specifically have to intend to commit the murder or to know that I am trying to commit the murder, whereas general intent is assault, sexual assault, and other offenses. So we basically say, like, by doing the thing, we're going to find that you intended to do the thing. I intended to assault you just because I did the assault. So when you add intoxication to that, we're basically saying this person couldn't have even intended to do the assault. They were not them. This was something else that was happening. So back after Davio, the legislature passed this legislation to basically say, like, we don't want people to get out of offenses just by claiming that they were drunk to the point that they couldn't have committed a general intent offense. So they passed 33.1. They cloaked it in the language of protecting women and children. And they did that because of Section 1, which we'll get to as well. So in Canada, you can have a violation of someone's charter rights that is defended under Section 1, which is reasonable limitations. So if you're dealing with the reasonable limitations on someone's rights, it has to be rationally connected. So the law has to be connected to the purpose that you're trying to achieve. It has to be minimally impairing. It can't be so overbroad that it would catch all these things that it wasn't intended to catch. And it has to be proportionate. So it can't be the beneficial effects have to outweigh the deleterious effects. So you don't want to punish people if there isn't a benefit to society. So my answer is this. I think the court did a good job at the Section 7 phase and 11D, finding those were violations. But at the Section 1 phase, I kind of disagree with the court. I do think that there is a pretty good argument for this not being minimally impairing. And your reasoning is there's so many other laws that you can pass, and the court goes through all those potential laws. So if the parliament doesn't go ahead and just pass one of those, they're really dumb. So I guess that's my opening.
Well, thanks so much. Very thorough and very useful. Okay. Bam?
Yeah, as an American, it's like tradition that we speak on topics that have nothing to do with us and throw our opinions around because we rule the world. So, like I said, in my people's native tongue, is how this would go. No, I was actually looking into this because, again, I don't know anything about Canada, and I thought this law sounded interesting. So it seemed, or not law. Let me see the ruling. but it seems to be that, like, from everything I've seen, said that alcohol alone wouldn't like meet the threshold for what this what the standard is, because I think like you would have to like extreme intoxication is something not that you just say that, but would have to be proven. And I think that the three cases they mentioned, or the three cases they mentioned, was someone involving like mushrooms. Two of them were mushrooms and alcohol combined, and the third was prescription pills. Like someone was, oh crap, I disappeared. Oh no, don't look at me. I'm back. Okay, sorry.
We weren't looking at you.
Thanks. So yeah, like I think that I don't believe that, from everything I'm seeing, I don't believe that this ruling is going to make it to where anyone who's drunk, any person who's drunk, immediately gets away scot-free. But I do think that is an interesting. Like, I think anytime if you have any deep dive into what responsibilities we grant to people who are intoxicated, whether it be alcohol or otherwise, I think you're always going to end up in a realm of contradictions, because obviously if they're intoxicated, we say that like, oh, okay, they can't be fully responsible for what they do, but that threshold is going to be like, where we draw that line is going to be really, really arbitrary.
Thank you so much. And yeah, and to be clear, we'll be starting with this case, but we're going to be talking about the wider subject as well. Okay, Erudite, please.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions specifically. So the ruling about this, the main thing that I think, like, because I'm openly a layperson when it comes to like law, is I have, it was a good breakdown by Franklin and Slash. I was trying to take notes of like all the different sections that are at play here. I probably mostly have a couple of clarifying questions about the implications. Overall, the idea of like, right, because the intoxication that we're talking about here is typically like a psychotic intoxication. Like, we're not talking about somebody just being drunk. We're talking about somebody like on psychedelics, not in this reality. And so the idea of my understanding is that it basically would allow like another form of NCR, which like a lot of people really hate NCR, and at least in Canada, it's really, really misunderstood like what NCR actually entails for the person. Typically, people who are NCR'd spend longer in the system than people who are found guilty.
What does NCR mean?
Non-criminally responsible. Yeah, sorry. NCR is non-criminally responsible, which this bill would allow. My understanding, I would defer to Franklin, but my understanding is this would allow intoxicated people to be found NCR. The reality, though, is that people found NCR just in general is exceedingly rare, and proving that they're NCR because of a temporary psychosis is going to be even more difficult. Like, this is going to be very, very rarely used. A lot of people are trying to say like this is going to like cause a lot of women who are already trying to get sexual assault claims like used against them, but almost all of these assaults are actually done under alcohol intoxication. So I don't actually expect it having that impact. So overall, I'm not really opposed to it. I have like a couple of questions of specifically how this could play out in certain instances. But beyond that, I mean, I'm not really forcing, like, if somebody's in a psychotic state, like, deterrence is basically a non-factor there. Sending them to jail, they're probably unlikely to recidivate. So why are we sending them to jail? Like, punitive justice has no purpose here. At this point, I'm looking more into rehabilitation. Like, you know, if they're psychotic and they're regularly abusing substances, I'd prefer them to be in a situation where they're getting treatment for addiction than for like in jail. And Canada is not perfect, but we definitely like at least LARP at having a somewhat rehabilitative justice system. And so I think this decision, if it plays out in the way that I'm understanding it, is a step in that direction, which I'm for.
Okay, Layman.
Yeah, so my opinion from what I've read, Franklin did a great job. I cannot suck his dick enough about how great of a job he did. So section 33.1, that's what this ruling is going against, what it struck down. So section 33.1, as Franklin said, it was struck down because it violated sections 11D of the charter, which is basically the, presumed innocent until proven guilty section of the charter, and then section 7 of the charter, which protects due process and everything that Franklin said. And I'm glad that he clarified what the charter is, because we're going to be saying the charter a lot to the Americoids. That's like our Bill of Rights, so to speak, just to make that a little more clear. But the primary reason, from what I could tell, why this was stricken down was probably justified, actually. the big thing from what I've looked into, again, like erudite, I'm a lay person, a layman, so to speak, on law. And
finally, we've been waiting for it.
And so yeah, so from what I understand, like the big thing was that like this law didn't take mens rea into account, which I think Franklin was touching on earlier, and that's really important. Now, so I think that it is good that it was stricken down. However, I would want True Daddy to or whatever prime minister happens to be in power whenever this is done, to basically issue the same law, but just have something within that law that does take mens rea into account. Because I do think that even if you are extremely intoxicated, there should still be some, accountability brought onto you from the justice system. If you murder somebody, or if you strip your clothes off naked while you're on like magic mushrooms and are crossfaded with beer, like what happened in RV Brown, which is one of the relevant cases I think that led to this decision, on top of the case that Franklin brought up earlier. So I do think that you could like introduce that same legislation again, like goal wise, but just make sure that it takes mens rea into account. Maybe don't treat it as morally the same as like, first degree murder or something like that, right? But maybe something akin to like manslaughter or something like that, like an unintentional killing, where the crime is not treated as harshly as it would be for like, murder with the intent to commit and stuff like that. So that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, Corey.
Yeah, so I covered the specifically the Brown story on my own stream, and I had, so going back to what Franklin and Slash brought up, of I'm familiar with the RV Parks case, and like going through that, where they essentially like they assaulted their in-laws and they killed one of them, and severely injuring another one. And like when I read through that case, like I actually I feel bad for that person. It's understandable why they weren't found, criminally responsible. As opposed to like reading through I'm not going to say like I fully like fleshed out, all my thoughts and feelings about it, and I'm very far from a legal scholar. But like when going through like the Brown case, and all the details that have been released, like, RV Parks, like I feel bad for that individual, because it seemed like, they were like genuinely sleepwalking, and like they clearly had no intent to do anything like that, obviously. As opposed to like in the Brown case, like, from what I understand, this was like essentially a high schooler, or at least a young person, combining both alcohol and psilocybin. And I think that changes things, at least for me personally. Like I had a pretty visceral reaction when reading this story, in terms of like, towards the individual, as opposed to like in the RV Parks, like I was more like empathizing. And so I think that says something. And so, where intent begins and ends, like I obviously can't say, but, I would say, if you're combining alcohol and a psychedelic, I don't think you may not be intending to harm anybody, but I don't think you're intending to do anything overly intelligent or responsible. I think that's fair. And so, like, with that in mind, and I think what's not taken into account is like there was a victim here that suffered permanent injuries. Like I don't know how I'd feel if I was like my home was broken into pretty violently, and my hands were suffered severe permanent damage, and then they just aren't held accountable. Although like I take Erudite's point that I'm all for reforming our prison system, but I do think if you're doing pretty much something I think clearly irresponsible, and you do something that harms another person, there should be some sort of accountability in there. Those are overall like my somewhat basic thoughts. But again, I haven't like really fully fleshed out my position on this specific case, because it's clearly complicated. And I'll end it there.
Thanks so much. All right, last username.
Right. So as Franklin beautifully explained, this is a situation, basically a bad law written for a good purpose. And the Supreme Court overturned it. Probably was actually a good decision, because it was a bad law. It was written for a good purpose. There was sort of a loophole where you could get away with committing a crime if you were severely intoxicated. But they're kind of sloppy writing the law, and now it's been overturned, they will probably the legislator will probably come up with a better law to plug that loophole probably pretty quickly. So I'm not too worried about that. I also just remind everyone that we're talking about the level of intoxication that you can use as a defense here is extreme to the point of being like not in control of yourself. That's very intoxicated, a level that you generally probably can't achieve with just alcohol. So just being drunk is not going to allow you to use this defense. You got to be like tripping balls, basically. You got to be psychotic, something like that. So this is not a defense that's going to be used. It's not used very often. It's not going to be used very often. It's going to be extremely rare in this kind of situation. And as to what the actual law should be, I mean, I know that's history. I assume that's probably what we'll be talking mostly about tonight, but it does seem intuitively like, at least in some cases, you should be responsible for, say, taking PCP and then going and committing some crime because you are completely psychotic out of your mind, even if you're not the kind of person who'd commit that crime. But, you know, when you're taking a drug that you know could make you lose control, seems like you are responsible for making sure that it doesn't do that, or that you can't do something terrible. But you can also come up with situations where you could be intoxicated and it wasn't your fault. Like your doctor prescribes you a drug, doesn't tell you that it has a side effect of driving you crazy, and it does, and you had no idea. Then maybe it's not your fault. Maybe it's your doctor's fault. So there are some little details we'll have to iron out, and hopefully, probably what we're going to discuss. Okay, that's me.
Yeah, thank you, Pan.
Yeah, so I think it's pretty clear that when you're in an a state of automatism, I don't know how it's pronounced.
State of autism?
Automatism. It's you know what I'm saying. Shut up, layman. It does seem to be the case that we probably shouldn't, they shouldn't be responsible for a crime. Obviously, if you don't have the mens rea to, commit a crime, it seems wrong that they can, prosecute you for the crime. However, I think the more interesting question is what happens beforehand, because to an extent, if you're going to as some of the other panelists have mentioned, if you're going to put yourself in a state where you have no control over your actions, there is some responsibility given if you know beforehand that you're not going to be able to control yourself. Just like you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're going to do something bad. And we do hold people criminally responsible when that happens occasionally. I think obviously DUIs aren't that's not the same level of drunkenness as automatism, but it still gets behind the point that if you put yourself into a situation where you can't control your actions, if you knowingly put yourself there, you should still be held responsible to a large extent. Maybe not for the exact crime that, otherwise, absent the automatism, you'd be convicted for. And I do think that it should remain as a defense because it's a completely legitimate defense in the examples of the cases that have been shown. It makes sense. Like if you take a drug that, basically turns you into a zombie or a medically issued drug that turns you into a zombie, and you do something bad, it makes a lot of sense that you probably shouldn't be held responsible for that crime. But in these circumstances where people are knowingly and willingly and potentially negligently putting themselves into a state where they can't control themselves and bad consequences are happening, I think it's clear there needs to be some, regulation of that.
Yubi, please.
Okay, so I guess kind of like something that I don't think was touched on by the lawyer guy is I'd be really curious to know how exactly they determine someone is in a state of automatism or automatonism, or what is it? The fucking word.
Autism. We already got it. Yeah.
Autism, right? At the time they actually automatism. Thank you so much, Mr. Lawyer guy. At the time they committed the crime versus like when they were caught 5-10 hours later, right? I'd be really curious to see like how they come up with that. Separate from the law itself, I think that I guess the wider question here is whether someone should be punished for intentionally putting themselves into a state of automatism, and then doing terrible things in that state without the Ritalin tarcoitus we usually look for when we're looking to pin the blame on somebody. For me, intentionally getting extremely intoxicated is enough, right? Adults should be held responsible for the things they do, even if the actions came as a result of like negligent behavior and not strictly as a result of Ritalin and tarcoitus, right? So if you get really high, you do a thing, right, and you go out and kill somebody, I don't think we need to look for Ritalin and tarcoitus to put you in jail for it. I think there's still a victim there. Crime still happened, so fuck you.
Okay.
What does what does that mean?
Riccolinin tarcoitus is just mens rea in a Finnish. I just figured if we're all going to be saying criminal intent in like another language, I guess
country do you live in,
I picked
man?
Finnish. So I just thought, I mean, we're all saying criminal intent. I don't know why we're using Latin. Like, just say criminal intent.
Because that's how they say it, and that's how they're talking.
Yeah, I just figured I'd pick another language that was cooler.
Okay.
Wow. All right. Well, open to the panel.
Okay, so seems like everyone kind of agrees. Well, Doobie, you don't think mens rea should matter? Like, they should still be prosecuted as though they were like intending to commit a crime or intending.
Yeah, I think if you intentionally put yourself into that state, then yeah, absolutely. I would say the same.
That's the point that I was trying to make of, like, you know, if you're combining alcohol and psilocybin, like, whether you're intending to harm someone, obviously, I don't know, but you're probably not intending to do something overly responsible or intelligent.
Yeah, no worries.
What if you say,
my concern is,
you take PCP and you say, well, I didn't know that PCP made you crazy. I thought I just made you like a little.
I don't think ignorance is usually ever a valid defense. I'm not a legal scholar.
Yeah. Sorry. So
can we just clarify something? Hold on.
We'll go to Erudite, Franklin, and then Pan.
Just to clarify, because a lot of people are saying like we shouldn't have no accountability, but does that mean that because this isn't saying that they get off scot-free and are found not guilty and then they just go home to their friends and get to do psilocybin again? They would be NCR'd. Do you guys not feel that NCR is any level of accountability, even though it's actually like a much more intensive process to get through, and it's actually indefinite intervention by the state until you are proven beyond any reasonable shadow of doubt to be like no risk to society. So it's some people are indefinitely NCR'd for even decently small crimes because they like remain in a somewhat psychotic state, or they're like decently psychotically violent and stuff like that. So when we're saying accountability, are you guys saying that you don't feel NCR is sufficient?
So what is NCR again?
Yeah, so when somebody's found non-criminally responsible, that doesn't mean that they're not guilty of the crime. We're saying that basically, like, while this crime and tragedy did happen, there are basically like exceeding rare circumstances that make you not criminally responsible for it. So you're not a criminal, you had no criminal intent or anything like that, but you still did the bad thing. So for example, a famous case, I think between Alberta and Saskatchewan was Lee, where he cut off the head of a bus driver. He was found NCR because he has, sorry?
No, that was just a candidate joke. Like,
it was
just the idea of candidate being famous. Okay.
And so
I get it. All right.
He was found non-criminally responsible. So no one is pretending like he didn't do these things. He's fully culpable for doing these things. However, he's not criminally culpable for it. So he was put into a psych ward. In fact, actually, one of my forensics profs was his #1 treater for this. And he spent a very long time in care, and he's still on very, very tight probations. He's finally released. And he actually this case specifically, he didn't want to be released out of the psych ward because he was so horrified by what he did when he was psychotic that he's like, even like, what if it happens again? And they're like, well, we're releasing you because you're very good at taking your meds. You've done all your therapy. We think that you won't. But he's still on very strict probation. He's got weekly check-ins. Like, being NCR'd is not nothing.
Is there a difference between?
Let's go to Franklin.
Is there a difference between?
Let's go Franklin, Pan. Franklin.
I just wanted to comment on, so one thing that we shouldn't confuse is intoxicated versus severely intoxicated to this degree. So a person can still, if I get drunk and punch someone, that's not going away. That's still the offense. The issue here is this was created, basically, it's so broad. Let me pull up my fun criminal code for you here.
So why are you doing that? You're going to get into like deep law shit, but can you like answer the automatism question for me when you're done?
So generally, like, your question is, just so I can have it.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, so if someone is in the state of automatism, how do they determine someone is in a state of automatism when they do the thing versus when they get caught, if it's like the next day that they get caught?
Awesome.
Right?
So here's something that they mentioned. Oh, am I still mic? Oh, no. Okay. Here's something that they mentioned in the actual case. When you are trying to lead evidence about someone being in a state of automatism, you have to get on the stand. So that's one thing that in most cases, you don't necessarily have to be available to testify. Like, you can sit and just wait, and the other side have to prove their case. But in this case, you do have to lead evidence about the amount that you ingested, and then you have to call an expert that's going to do an assessment about what the levels of intoxication were at a given time. So when you're dealing with something like alcohol, they can usually take your blood alcohol after and work backwards. When it comes to something like psilocybin, they would figure out the levels. They would see, well, do you have any underlying history that might have caused this? They would do a full assessment. There'd be a bunch of evidence that they would have to lead to make out this argument. So even getting rid of this, you still have to be able to successfully lead the defense. So if the judge is like, well, this person seemed to have their faculties. And it gets even more complicated because if you put that person on the stand and they start giving evidence that sounds like they knew what they were doing in any way, because that happens a lot in sexual assault cases where someone suggests, I was so drunk, I couldn't have made decisions. And then you ask them one question, they're like, yeah, so at like 9 o'clock. And it's like, well, didn't this happen at like 8:55? How do you remember anything from 9 o'clock? And you can like really quickly ping them on the fact that they're leading evidence that doesn't make any consistent sense. So generally it is determined by the experts and the witness that's providing the evidence. But there's no independent way for us to know how intoxicated anyone is. It's just evidence that's presented.
Yeah, I think that's some of the challenges of like the sleepwalking cases. Like we're just relying on hopefully sleep experts, a number of them say like, yep, this person, whatever, has history, or like it's a legit thing.
Yeah, versus like you murdered somebody and then took a bunch of pills and then told everybody it happened like in half an hour earlier or some shit, right? Like it just seems, it seems really disgusting.
So can I
go
give
back
the
to
facts? Oh, sorry.
So finish your point, and then we'll go to Pan, and then Layman.
Okay. I just want to go through the facts of Sullivan because I think this case makes it a little more complicated. So Sullivan was the gentleman that he was dealing with smoking. So they gave him Wellbutrin, which in some cases can create psychotic episodes, or at least can bring to the forefront your psychotic episodes. So he had previously taken 80 milligrams with the intention of trying to kill himself. And he was aware that in previous circumstances, when he took the Wellbutrin, he had these psychotic episodes. So I think that actually might be interesting to hear people's perspective, because again, I could only legally talk, I could give my normative opinion, but that's gross. But like, if you're dealing with the normative, do you think that someone who's very aware they have psychotic episodes when they take too much of their substance, or when they take this thing, should be going to their doctors, should be doing these other things to stop themselves from these potential episodes? And in that one, I believe he stabbed his mother when he had a psychotic episode that aliens were coming to attack him. So that actually is where not so erudite would be correct in the section 16, because when I read that, it sounds almost like they're like, well, you can't use section 16 because you're intoxicated. But if you could, you actively thought your mom was part of the aliens abducting you. And that, you start to sound like, well, I don't know if I want to hold this person accountable if they honestly thought their mom was an alien and that they were protecting the human race in their magical reality.
Let's go to Pan, and then Layman.
Yeah, so something not so erudite said was that NCR is still, a sort of holding people accountable. They have to go through this process. And I'm not very familiar with how the law works in Canada, but I can't imagine that NCR for mental illness is going to be treated the same way as NCR for an intoxicant. Mental illness obviously isn't something that's just going to pass over, whereas intoxicants are just going to leave your system eventually. So I think the worry here is that I correct me if I'm wrong. I really hope I am wrong, but I don't think that someone who uses a NCR defense here is going to have to spend years in a psych ward, right? I'm pretty sure as soon as they're no longer in the state of automatism, that they'll be let out, right? Or am I wrong?
Perhaps the legal experts could enlighten us on that.
Yeah, exactly. Frank,
I'm going to tell you a horrific real story from my practice. So I was dealing with a habeas corpus, which is an application when you're trying to be released from a prison. In this situation, there was a gentleman who was traveling by bus, because it seems to happen, from Alberta to Nova Scotia. In about Quebec, he took a hairspray and flamed a person in the face. He was very drunk at the time. However, he didn't actually have a mental health condition outside of antisocial personality disorder. However, he was assessed as someone who had schizotypal disorder, and they found him NCR. Now, unfortunately, they transported him to Nova Scotia after that, so he could not appeal. But he was stuck in the NCR system because they had found that he was not criminally responsible for his actions. And when he appeared in front of the Criminal Review Board to be released, they said, "You are a danger. You are an active danger, and we can't treat you because you're a psychopath. So I'm sorry, you're stuck in here forever." And as far as I know, he's still stuck in there and can't get out until he goes to Quebec and appeals his decision and says, "I actually was an NCR. I'm just a psychopath."
Yeah, NCR is actually
That's nuts.
now obviously like there's going to be like rare circumstances, and I'm sure somebody will find like one anecdote where like the NCR system fails, but broadly it's really difficult because you have to basically prove that all preceding factors that led to the situation are cleared. So if it's I randomly use psilocybin for fun, how do you treat that? But they're not just going to let you run free. What they're going to do is they're going to probably diagnose you with a couple of things and spend you in treatment. Imagine if the reason is addiction, for example. Do you know the relapse rate of addiction? Really high. They're not going to let you out until they're guaranteed that you're not going to relapse, which how are you going to do that? Relapse rate is 60%. So a lot of times people end up in NCR for way, way longer than we would even expect because a lot of these preceding conditions, like even schizophrenia, it takes years to be confident that first of all, it takes years to find the right medication regimen for you specifically because dopamine and serotonin are fucking weird. Second of all, we have to prove that you've been on the regimen long enough and you're consistent with it, that you are never going to have some strange episode. And then third, we also have to prove that you will always comply with your medication regimen. So like these are three very high standards to hold. So my understanding is typically with NCR individuals, we have more of the opposite problem of people never getting out than people getting out too early. But of course, like I said, there's going to be issues where maybe one slips through the cracks, but it's typically leaning the opposite direction.
Okay, so
There's no history
basically,
of
if
NCR of cases that are NCR due to extreme intoxication because it's never been.
Well,
I
it's
guess
not
never
allowed
been
in
committed
Canada.
against-
Yeah.
Well, not since 1995, but what about before that?
I believe this overturning will be the first case where you can actually use intoxication as a claim for specifically NCR. So at this point, we would have no data on this. I just know kind of broadly, very loosely, what the NCR boards are like, which is that they're tough.
If I can just
but I mean, we have a
interject,
good reason to expect they'd change, right?
I just wanted to interject. It has been struck down before. Here's the problem with Canadian law is so you can, if it goes up to the Supreme Court of Canada, we have Section 52, which it can strike down a law. If it isn't struck down, then the way they were reading it in Ontario was that it was still appropriate law and could be distinguished, but the law itself was still valid. So it was still being used in cases after it was struck down, and it was struck down in other cases, including Sullivan, which happened in 2020. So it's this weird half scenario where unless it goes up to the big court, and you see that in the States too, where something will get struck down on a local level but isn't the general rule of law.
Franklin, if I may ask, the situation that you outlined with that individual, like I don't know for sure, but I'm assuming that like the system wasn't designed that way to have that play out. But,
no.
And then that's
No.
sort of like that's a sort of, from what I understand, like collateral damage of like due to flaws in the system. So I don't see how that's a testament to like not criminally responsible. To me, that's sort of just like that's not how the system is actually supposed to be run.
It's not supposed to be. It could actually be remedied by the Criminal Review Board if they'd looked deeper into the situation. The issue is it happens more frequently than we would like, because a lot of people who present as having antisocial personality disorder might present several different ways. So it becomes more difficult to assess exactly what their condition was at the particular time. And as Not So Erudite pointed out, they might have multiple different diagnoses that are intersecting. So not criminally responsible is going to apply in some of these situations, but I mean, generally the issue is there's lots of people that have underlying conditions that don't really know about it. There's Ledecky is another old case where a guy took magic mushrooms and then assaulted his girlfriend while he was sleeping. Like he just kind of came out of it while he was sleeping, and they still applied the standard of him being intoxicated. So that's where that like sleepwalking versus if you decided to take the drugs, you should be punished for it comes in. And I know we're going to talk about this, but the Supreme Court, one of their suggestions was just creating an offense called like intoxication while committing another offense. So that in itself doesn't necessarily punish the person for taking the intoxicant, but might be a solution where you're going, look, you break and enter while you were high, you knew that you were going to get high, so breaking and entering is the thing that we're going to punish you with, but backdoor it through the morality of you shouldn't have got high.
Let's go to Layman.
Yeah, there's something I wanted to ask a really long time ago to Doobie. Even if you don't agree, so Doobie, even if you don't agree with NCR as like a prescription to that crime, I would just it almost sounded like you said that killing somebody while you're experiencing psychosis, while you're on psychedelics, should be treated the same as something like first degree murder, where you have like a deliberate like intention to kill somebody. Like they should be treated as like morally the same. That I'm just interested. Is that your position?
Yeah.
I think I might have
Hold on. So I wouldn't say like first degree murder, because I think that requires like that you've like what's the word I'm looking for?
Premeditation.
You've like
premeditation. Yeah. Intent.
Yeah. So I wouldn't say that, right? But I would still call it murder, you know, in one of the degrees, whether it's like second or third. Because I don't think that if you intentionally put yourself into that state, and that's like the line, right? So it was an accident, right? And you didn't know this was going to happen. Someone like drugged your drink or whatever. Sure, fine. I can see, you know, the answer thing being used for that. But if you intentionally put yourself into this state, then yeah, I think you're absolutely responsible for everything that you do afterwards.
So the responsibility is something that we're agreeing on, but what should be the outcome, right? Like if somebody's responsible for drugging and drinking and stuff and getting themselves into the state, why would punitive justice be the most effective way of handling that sort of case rather than some other thing like NCR, like treatment, mandated?
Well, if you allow people to get a lesser sentence, better sentence because they're high, it seems like you're just incentivizing people to get high before they commit a crime.
Right. Like there's a case I actually wanted to bring up that was also related to this law. Like in I think it was like the 90s, I think. A man raped a 75-year-old woman in a wheelchair. Right, I think she was 75. I know she was an old woman in the wheelchair. They described her as like elderly, and I read somewhere it was 75. But an elderly woman in a wheelchair. He raped her, was convicted, and they found that, and his defense was that he was too drunk to know what he was doing at the time. He never denied raping her. He just said he was too drunk to know what he was doing. So he didn't take like a cocktail of drugs. He didn't have like a psychotic break. He was just really, really, really drunk. Right. And recently, the Canadian courts have found that he was wrongfully convicted for raping that woman. Right. So I think that when you say that, hey, being too drunk, getting too drunk, and then raping somebody, that's enough of a defense for us to not convict you for that thing. Is you're getting to really dangerous territory, or like last username said, you're incentivizing people to either get really, really drunk before committing a crime, or to plan it so that immediately after they kill somebody, they pop a bunch of mushrooms, right? And so they can get into that state of automatism or whatever, and say that later that, hey, this was an accident, yada yada, right? So I think you should absolutely treat them the same if they intentionally put themselves into that state.
But what if they didn't intentionally put themselves into that state? I think that's what we were kind of talking about, right?
Well,
you can find evidence of that.
Yeah, that's another thing. So if the drink was drugged or something, sure, but like that's like a different conversation.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd hold them responsible for, you know, something they did in a state like that if their drink was drugged, right, or whatever.
Franklin.
So you're referring to the case of RV Davio. I'm not excited to talk about the facts of this case, but yeah, it was a person that I believe he was seeing. He entered into her house. He had drank, I believe it was close to 4 times the legal limit. A person that assessed his alcohol levels said he should have died from the amount of alcohol that he had consumed. He drank a 60, was my understanding. The issue there obviously is you don't, as a toxicologist, you don't want to get into someone's tolerance, because hypothetically, for all we know, he could have had the tolerance that would allow for this. It was noted, however, that during the assault, she grabbed his testicles to the point that they turned black, and that he had to undergo medical treatment after the fact from that severe injury. He did not stop during this, which is the suggestion of the automatism. and that later they tried to run the case based on showing that he had the intent. And unfortunately, the person passed away, not from the injuries, but from something else in the interim, so he couldn't be retried on the matter. But I think that is an extreme case that we would be holding up for alcohol use. My concern would be that more people, as you've highlighted, might think that they have a defense in getting really intoxicated as opposed to actually having a defense. So I don't think the issue is people getting off. I think the issue is people thinking that that could be a possibility. And obviously that's part of the concern too, if more people are concerned with victims' rights, is, well, what if all these people are getting off from this horrific offenses?
Yeah, actually, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel very mixed about this, because I think, like, as far as like deterrence and punitive justice, I actually think for the most part we do that pretty well. I think when people try to say like punitive justice is silly, I don't think they realize that, like, broadly that's because, like, we do it pretty well. Like, most people in their right mind, for the most part, don't do certain things because they know that there are certain crimes, right? Like, for the most part, deterrence works. The issue, if we wanted to get to deterrence theory, it's a whole complex thing, but we don't actually, like, we can't quantify the efficacy of deterrence. And when it comes to specific things, like in the cases where like people are abusing substances and all sorts of things, I really would like to see a system that is directly aimed at rehabilitation rather than just purely incarceration. I think incarceration really works for these like high recidivizing sociopathic type folks that seem highly resistant to treatment, that we believe have very low likelihood, and we kind of to some extent incarcerate them once to like a point where they're like older, because we see recidivism drops dramatically as people get older. But there's a lot of situations where we're putting people in jail who are probably low recidivist rates, right? Like, most people who've been NCR'd, for example, the recidivism rate of NCR is insanely low. Like, it's less than 1%, which is good. That means NCR is doing what it's supposed to be doing to some extent, right? And I'm concerned, as somebody who's like worked with addicts, and I've worked with addicts in the judicial system. I'm lucky enough that like I've been in a court-appointed system where people choose between jail and rehabilitation, which I think is super cool. But I'm interested if part of what this, like, I think there are genuine concerns about like deterrence and some of these optics pieces. I think that that's actually one of the biggest ones that username brought up, is like, does this optically change the level of deterrence? Because that's not good, right? We don't want that. But this might also serve to like getting more in the step of streamlining people into the method of rehabilitation that is actually going to prevent future crime, which to me is a good idea.
Is deterrence morally relevant to you, Doobie, at all? Or
yeah, of course.
Okay. I just know a lot of people.
So the case of like this there was Davio guy. So you said that, yeah, this was like a lethal dose for the average person, but if you've built up your alcohol tolerance, right? If you're a regular drinker, you could drink that much. It's like 14 shots for a 200-pound man in like an hour or two, or get you to that level. I know people who can drink that much pretty easily, right? Unfortunately. So in the fact that he would need to be a regular alcohol drinker to get to that level, like, and not die, just is for, I think, further evidence that, hey, he should have known what his fucking limit is, right? He should be aware, hey, once you hit this point, you should stop. And the fact that he kept going and then raped somebody and then got in his car and was driving down the road endangering other people's lives, I think is enough for me to say, hey, fuck you. I don't care that you were drunk. I don't care that you were extremely drunk, 4 times the legal limit, whatever it is. You still raped somebody. You still put other people's lives in danger on the road, so you should go to prison.
On our, like, outside of like the legal sense, and obviously we can go back to it if that's where the conversation I get that's where it's supposed to be. How do we feel about the level of responsibility we put on people who consume alcohol generally?
I do think that, like, despite what I've said, I do think that there is like a very high level of responsibility you have to put onto people. I think that, like, if people are doing things like in I think it was RV Brown, and like RV Brown, for example, maybe I got the name mixed up or whatever, but I'm pretty sure, like, in one of these cases that led to the Supreme Court decision, there was a guy who literally did like a fuck ton of magic mushrooms, so much magic mushrooms crossfaded with like a ton of other alcohol. Like, if you're gonna do that much shit, like, you have to be aware that you could do some crazy fucking shit, and you're not gonna know how, you're not gonna have the autonomy over your own body to stop yourself from doing that stuff if you put yourself in that situation. So there's definitely responsibility on putting yourself in situations where you can do harm to yourself and others to begin with. I think everybody, I would hope, would agree with that for sure. The disagreement seems to be about like, how do we treat that like legally, or like morally, what do we do, or what should we do, or what ought we do, or whatever legally about that.
I think the big issue is like, whenever I picture this case, and this is me presupposing for the entire room, because maybe y'all feel differently. Whenever we think about cases of like sexual assault, and we think about particular cases of like alcohol, drugs, and like intoxication, and the levels of responsibility we hold people to, I believe that these thoughts are very, very gendered, in the ways that the responsibilities we grant to men in these circumstances versus the level of responsibilities we grant to women. And some of that is necessary. I believe that like it would be unreasonable to assume that like men and women are capable of the same things like under intoxication. But I'm curious if anybody else feels that way, because I do think there's
you can say your statement, and then I'm gonna go to Corey and last
Corey,
name.
Yeah, no worries. So yeah, just I want to just clarify. Do you think there's more responsibility on men or more responsibility on women?
So there's differences. To protect yourself, I think there's more responsibilities on women. Mm-hmm. But to protect society, I'd like in terms of like the danger you could do to society, I think we generally put more responsibility on men.
Okay.
Probably for good reason.
Let's go to Corey and last year's name.
Oh yeah, my point is a little bit past the current topic, but like, I mean, to Erudite's point of like, I'm overall like in favor of like, pretty much I'm all for the decriminalization and pretty much legalization of all drugs, and I don't think people should be criminalized or sent to prison for any sort of addictive behavior, well, substance abuse disorder, I guess. But I do think an exception, or like, I think the law has taken into account of like certain contexts like this of the Brown case of like a particular person that doesn't appear to be struggling with addiction, and like, yes, they made probably a very poor judgment, but like they seem to be knowingly mixing like psychoactive substances, and like, to me, I think there's a difference between like someone like struggling with substance use disorder, and like they're struggling to, you know, for lack of a better analogy, of like keeping the hands on the wheel of like exercising agency, and someone who's like actually like taking substance, saying, hey, take my hands off the wheel, and wherever the car goes, like, well, I think there should hopefully be a distinction to be made, and that the law can take that into account.
I mean, right. I feel like they should actually probably be more responsible, because someone who does it habitually can't really, you know, since they don't have the agency to do it, they're more at risk of doing it again. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, but we just have like poor like medical and treatment options for those people, and so it's like a struggle to like how to manage that, as opposed to like this is someone who appears to be exercising like a conscious choice of like, I want to take my hands off the wheel. I think
right. Isn't that why people do like drugs in the first place, is to like enter a different state of consciousness?
I was going to say, can't I redirect? When we're talking about this specific amendment, we're not saying that they're not being found culpable. Like, again, if it leads in that direction, I would also be opposed to that. Like, obviously, absolutely. But my understanding is it doesn't bar them from culpability. It changes how we manage. It changes whether it's a criminal charge and they get put in jail versus they go to a psych ward and get treatment. And you might be like, what about this random kid? Here's the thing. You ask anyone who like uses drugs that aggressively and that often, everyone's got shit. It's not hard to find childhood trauma in almost anyone. And you could argue that that's the reason why he did these things, right? And so it's like, again, I'd be concerned that actually these people probably wouldn't be getting out of NCR. And in general, I'm not even sure if I'm for the full decriminalization of drugs for the pure purpose of, a lot of times criminalization of drugs gets people into rehab, and forced rehab is actually highly effective. It's slightly more effective than voluntary rehab, actually. And so I want these people to be treated, but I'm very uncomfortable, even in the case of the guy who took 14 shots, I'd still prefer him to get treatment, especially if he's just like an addict with no antisocial personality or anything like that. I'd prefer him to get treated, right? Because the thing that's going to guarantee lack of recidivism is that he's not an addict anymore. That's going to be the number one guarantee that we can kind of manage for.
Let's go to last year's name, DB Franklin.
I'm just wondering if there are actually a lot of substances that can get you intoxicated enough to use this defense, which is like, not in control of your actions at all, and are highly addictive. It seems like I've only heard this so far. I've just heard about mushrooms, which are not really addictive, and whereas
Bupropion.
alcohol, which
Bupropion is the case of Sullivan. He took bupropion, which is an antidepressant. So it affects basically adrenaline and dopamine.
Yeah, most prescription
also
drugs,
not
Also, just
or a
like to
lot of
say, any
prescription
drug
drugs.
can
So-
be addictive. Like
Well,
any drug can be addictive. Just want to put that out.
Yes, sort of.
Well,
but
there's a difference between psychological addiction and physical
Yeah.
dependence.
Yeah.
I
When
mean,
we're
if it's not
talking about
addictive, then that kind of removes the reason to put them in the NCR system and make them and like institutionalize them or whatever. Like if they really did take a drug that is not addictive and they just took it once and they used that as a defense for their crime and the defense was accepted, it's not clear why you would want to imprison them at all.
What do you mean by
Right,
not addictive?
other than- Well, like just because you do mushrooms once, it doesn't and go crazy. It doesn't mean that you're like definitely going to do them again. In fact, but what would convince the legal system that this guy is not going to do mushrooms again, other than him saying like, well, I'm never going to do that again, because look what happened this time. I mean, it's not like he had a mushroom addiction, right?
Let's go
Right.
to Deuce.
Well, yeah,
Probably never
of
did
that
it
specific
before.
case, I think it was the second time that they consumed psilocybin.
Okay. And what happened the first time? I assume he didn't go
They
on a killing
not kill someone as far as
he
I
didn't
know.
attack
Right.
people.
So this guy probably he's not addicted, and he probably did mushrooms because he didn't have any particular reason to think it was going to be this ridiculous thing was going to happen. And now he probably is not going to do mushrooms anymore because he knows that it tends to make him a little crazy. I mean, so what else? Like, what else could he reasonably do to convince anyone that he's not going to do it again, other than say like, well, I'm not going to do that again.
Let's go to
Well,
Doobie.
this is yeah, sorry.
Let's go to Doobie and then Frank. Then
Well, my question is actually very similar to Lai's usernames. So, in the case of that guy or the guy who just got really, really drunk, or raped somebody, and then got in his car and drove down the road. So with my guy, you could put him into force him to go to an alcoholics rehab thing, right? But that's not 10 years in prison, right, for raping somebody, right? This woman's gonna have to live the rest of her life with the trauma. It's a rehab program, and then he's out, right? And he still did all this damage. In the case of the guy that murdered somebody while under the mushrooms, he didn't know his tolerance level. Very new to doing this kind of drug, so he fucked up, went too far, hurt somebody, and then he just says he won't do it again. And then what? How is the NCR?
I mean, to be clear, I'm in favor
issue.
of just punishing him for the actual crime that he committed. I don't think.
Yeah, I'm wondering how. So if it's
But-
just a one-off thing, they fucked up, they didn't know the tolerance, and they hurt somebody, and then they sit in front of me and say, hey, I didn't know, I was very new to doing this kind of thing, I'll never do it again. Where else do you take that?
I mean, why shouldn't, if there's evidence that they're never going to do it again, why should they? What's the purpose of putting them in jail for 10 years? If
I think
they,
that was-
They still did the crime.
Some
They
people
still
like
hurt
sure, but
somebody.
if rehab will make it so that they don't reoffend, there doesn't seem to be any.
Well, it's not
reason
just
to
not
send
just about
them to-
reoffending. I'd like to punish them for doing the thing they did.
Well, you're very unique in this, Doobie. You're kind of a
I
sadist.
think
when it comes to
I'm
this.
very
no, no.
normal. I think most people
That's not true at all.
say, hey, you've murdered somebody. I don't care if you're never going to murder somebody again. You don't get to just murder somebody and walk away.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
maybe
I assume most
There-
people.
nobody
would
here is
want to
suggesting
hold
that
someone
they just walk
responsible
away.
for taking mushrooms and committing a crime. I assume so, right?
Right. So this
But
is
at the
getting to the
moment-
question. This is getting the question of
Yeah.
what do we want our justice system to serve? Like, what is its purpose, right? When it comes to something like Doobie's talking about retribution, I'm going to be honest, him incarcerated or not doesn't actually change her trauma, and it doesn't make her feel better. One of the main things that make the victims feel better is mostly when they die, because a lot of the fear that they have around this individual is that they're going to come back and hurt them again.
Yeah.
Typically, that's a lot of what they cite. And if he gets treated and never recidivates again, that's the same thing as him sitting in jail, except now he's also productive in society and not costing taxpayers, right? So when it comes
That's
to
one
the
of the
victim
reasons I
itself,
support execution.
well, here's the thing. I don't think the justice system is a great avenue for dealing with victims and their pain, right? It's not really the solution. The purpose of the justice system is typically deterrence, we could argue punishment, but like to what purpose, right? Making us feel better, sure, maybe we can talk about that, right? And is it efficacious? And then typically rehabilitation, right? Making them not want to do it again. In the past, we thought if we punish them enough, that'll be enough to convince them not to do it again. Well, it turns out most people who serially offend are impulsive. They're typically under the influence anyways. So this has nothing to do, like they're not rationally. Now we're getting into deterrence theory, which we can get into if we want.
May I jump in?
Like all that fits
Franklin,
in.
Franklin, please.
I need to say this because there's a bunch of legal things happening. So few things. When there is a ton of case law dealing with this one-off thing, and it actually makes perfect sense. I actually agree with last username and Doobie to some extent, which is that you shouldn't just NCR people who are going to do something once. If you have a one-time, event that could occur and could result in you having automatism, the whole point is that it is unlikely to happen again. But more importantly, like if we look at the reasoning from RV Parks, which Corey, has discussed, like part of the problem there is you can't really treat sleepwalking in that same degree long term. Like there's not going to be a method for stopping this person from doing this again with treatment. Like there isn't a let's chain him to his bed solution for how do we stop him from doing something like this again. It's just kind of, we accept that this probably won't occur again. We allow people their freedom and the ability to do those things. And I think part of like what the justice system is premised on is intent. We want to hold people that intend to do bad things accountable. If you're going to get into some offenses that have like intent to do things that negligently cause things, it's a super high standard. It's the marked departure standard, which is like most of the courts have trouble even interpreting. It's kind of this standard of like, so for example, RV Beatty was one recently where a person was driving their vehicle. They drove into a lane and hit 3 people, killing them. So that wasn't considered a marked departure because the court looked at it and they said, this person was not swerving on the road. They were not engaging in any behavior that seems like they were departing from the road standards. They just seem to have made a mistake and killed people. So you get into a debate over, do you want a consequentialist justice system, which is bad thing happened, let's punish you? Or do you want a system that's based on, did you intend to do a thing? We now want to punish you because you had that intent of doing the thing. And that's the weird thing about these charges is we're actually saying the actus reus, which is not even the mental element. The mental element would be, I didn't intend to do it. We're saying the actus reus is gone, which is you didn't actually do that. Some other guy sitting in your brain did that. That wasn't you.
I don't want to have to break out the finish again. Could you say that in American, please? Like, what is actus reus mean?
He doesn't speak American.
You didn't do the thought intent.
Fucker.
Thank you, sir.
But yeah, you didn't even have the, like, you didn't do it as in you didn't think to do it, but also you didn't do it as in you didn't physically do it. Something else happened. It would be the equivalent of like if I had a seizure right now while holding a gun and my gun went off and hit 6 people. It would be really weird if you said, well, you have seizures, so you shouldn't have a gun ever. And more importantly, why did you shoot all those people? Like, we don't want that standard because it creates a lot of problems if we're just going to blame people for their underlying conditions or things they didn't do.
So I want to actually try to move this conversation along to the next stage, right? So I think we have a lot of agreement on the case itself, but more to where Doobie was going, right? When it comes to and focusing specifically on sexual assault, when it comes to interactions between 2 individuals, like even when both of them are sober, there can be misunderstandings. There could be a lack of communication, and that could lead to bad outcomes, right? But once you add alcohol into it, right, like that skyrockets. That people aren't reading what their partner is telling them to do, or their feelings, right? They just don't understand, and then that drives them to maybe go too far or whatever.
Violence is a big one with intoxication. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but it's not necessarily violence. So I'm not necessarily talking about violence. It just could be that consent gets misconstrued, and in the end, someone is violated, right, in some sort of way. So I want to understand, like, how does consent change here? Like your sorry, how does your level of responsibility, right, the culpability of individuals change? So like we're not talking about the extreme intoxication, but just being intoxicated, right? And then people saying, well, yeah, I didn't know, and I didn't mean to do it, but like, should that matter? And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, you got to go case by case with something like that, right? So there's a difference between someone knows that like they have a family history of alcohol abuse, maybe they have a history of alcohol abuse, and yet maybe they continue to abuse alcohol, and they keep doing something horribly negative, something abusive, physically or emotionally abusive to their partner over and over again, and they have an addiction and they need rehab, and then how do you go about that? And there's like that, and then there's like one guy who's just an asshole, got fucked up once and was an asshole. So like, I mean, there's responsibility on both ends, but the way that you would have to go about like each situation would just depend on the individual, how you would approach a situation like that. So it's tricky, I guess. But Franklin wanted to say something, and he knows more than me. So you go.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
I wanted to bring up. So there's a really controversial case that occurred a few years ago, 2018, where a Judge Lanahan, near where I'm from, stated that clearly a drunk can consent. The facts of said scenario were that there was a cab driver. So currently what was happening at the time was there was robberies that were occurring, and the person was getting in the cab after they did a robbery. So that's a weird choice. But what happened was the police had an all points bulletin out for cabs, and one of the police officers came across a cab where a cab driver was sexually assaulting a very intoxicated woman to the point that she had peed herself. So in that judgment, the judge came to the decision that clearly a drunk can consent, and that in that case, they found that she had consent but didn't remember it. That's a huge problem because that's a fully sober person and a fully intoxicated person. Obviously, we all know cases where both parties are intoxicated, and here I honestly don't think that this particular, obviously, fact scenario, I don't think that that's the concern. I think the issue is when you're dealing with what are standards around what people think is consent, or what is socially acceptable, or what indication someone had that someone was consenting. Like, that needs to change socially if any court could ever find those facts bear out that someone consented.
I think the problem here is that drunk describes a very wide range of behaviors. Drunk describes being, a little bit tipsy, but overall, I would say probably able to consent. And people who are pissing themselves drunk, who almost certainly cannot consent. I think that this obviously has to be taken on a case-by-case scenario. Obviously, people who are a little drunk probably can consent, and people who are very, very drunk probably cannot consent. So I really think this needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. If we're going to say whether or not they can consent. And I don't think that while it might affect the severity of the crime, I don't think that the, alcohol content of the other party is entirely relevant to determining whether or not someone can consent. Whether or not the person was also slightly drunk, or whether the hopefully the cab driver wasn't slightly drunk because he's driving a cab, but whether or not he was, the fact that he was sober, I don't think should make that much of an issue in this case, rather than if he were slightly drunk. I think it's just as bad, and I think that the intentionality is just as bad.
I don't think it's just as bad. That doesn't and that doesn't make sense to me. Like, the degrees of drunk of the other party, like, it has to be a factor. Like, if someone says I was blacked out, and they say like, me too, like, I had no idea. I feel like not using it as a factor, using this as a factor in deciding like, okay, was there any foul play here, or were this two people that ended up in the situation?
I guess I'm more talking about like permissibility, right? Like, if someone is, if we deem someone able to consent because they're not drunk enough, that doesn't change based on the other person's drunkenness, I would say.
But
I don't know
where we
why
place the
being
responsibility?
drunk-
There's a line.
I don't know why
where it is of how of
Like
where
in-
you're able to consent, right?
Why should consent depend on how drunk you are? What, like, if you,
Exactly.
it seems to me it should only consent on what you say and do. It shouldn't matter how drunk you are, because that, if it does, then the other person is responsible for, in addition to like communicating with you, also figuring out how drunk you are, and then deciding whether and that changes how they interpret the communication with you, and that doesn't seem like it should be their responsibility to me.
It seems to be when you're drunk, you're some version of like not
You're
yourself.
unable to consent. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
so
issue
you're
would be
making-
like, what if a girl
But-
is basically completely KO'd, and then they ask if they want to have sex, and she can't even coordinate her body, and she goes, yeah, right? At that point, it's like, is she really consenting? Does she even know what you said?
Well,
Is she just like,
I would say
did
it's
she even
not
say yeah,
consent,
or did
but
she
it's
go
not consent
yeah?
because she didn't say yes? Because she's
No,
not
but
clearly
Erudite
But
did
it-
say yes in
I
her
went like this,
example.
yeah, right? And so you could
Like,
interpret that as
yeah.
consent, right? This is why we
Well-
have the intoxication consent line of saying, like, at some point people are too intoxicated that they can no longer consent.
Like there's a difference between being a little tipsy
that's
and
'cause they
then
can't
like
speak.
you're totally fucked.
Well,
and
But
I-
you,
if
you can be
someone can't
before
speak,
that.
then
you
they
can,
can't consent.
No, it's
you
about
can be
cognition.
That's
before
not-
that.
It's
right?
about
you can
cognition.
speak that, yeah.
And
yeah,
yeah,
it's
you can
about
be
cognition.
pretty lucid and legible.
Yeah, GABA's
and-
weird. GABA affects your brain super weirdly. It affects a very, very old structure. And so some people, like, we all know that one guy who gets fucking blasted. He can't even walk, but he still can say like things like photosynthesis perfectly fine. So like the idea of like it's just around speech, it's about cognitive awareness and like
Yeah.
ability to
Well,
actually like understand informatively what you're
Yes.
consenting to.
Okay, but if someone is able to speak, let's say that someone, like, no matter how drunk they get, they can seem perfectly sober and speak perfectly, and they're like, yes, I do consent to having sex with you. Let's go have sex. It doesn't seem like the other person should be responsible for knowing that that person is actually drunk out of their mind and has no idea what they're saying, even though they sound like they're completely sober.
Well, listen,
Last
I have
answer
lots
is
of
fair to
but I can read
I
some
think that's
pretty
fair.
obvious social cues if somebody is like fucked up, you know? Like if
Well, I
somebody
think what he's saying is that
somebody-
those cues aren't
somebody-
there.
I'm supposing that they can't.
There's
Wait,
different drugs. If this isn't alcohol, let's say you're dealing with like, there's a number of other drugs that you can be what we would consider like super intoxicated, but it's not in the way that we consider like sloppy drunk. Like you're not aware of you're not necessarily cognitively aware of what you're doing, but you're still like, and I wouldn't put that
You
responsibility.
usually like smell it on people. You're in an environment where other people are drinking usually, and it's
Yeah,
just
but
like a
we're not talking
concern-
about
Yeah,
drinking.
but you're avoiding my question. You're avoiding
Or
my
sorry,
question.
and
What
drugs. or
What about a
whatever. Sorry about that.
situation where you can't tell the person is drunk, but they are, and
Let's- Let's go to
Can I
Franklin
just
and Doobie.
interject for that?
Franklin and Doobie.
I just want to say, in terms of what you're talking about, last username, that is a defense. So the way that criminal offenses are structured is you have to prove all the elements on the one side, which is that the things happened that have to happen, and then the mental stuff has to happen, which is you intended for X things to happen. So on one side, the person can say, I didn't consent, and that meets the standard. But on the other side, you can have a mistaken belief in consent, which is the standard around, well, you know, here were the indications. This was very clear to me that this was consensual. The issue comes down to what people will hold up as mistaken belief in consent. Because some people might say, oh, well, you know, we fool around every time. It's fine. Usually this seemed to suggest to me that it was X, versus, you know, this person clearly said yes, and I interpreted that to mean yes, and therefore I went ahead with it. Like in most of those cases, it's going to be thrown out unless there's some other indicia that's like you couldn't have thought that that was clearly what they were talking about. So I think on the criminal standard, if that's what we're looking at, then yeah, you have built-in protections. If you're talking about like normative, I don't think I would go ahead with that anyway if I think someone is really intoxicated. But that's just, you know, the person making a decision. We don't want to necessarily hold a person accountable if they make the decision that, well, I've had a mistaken belief and I really thought that this was fine.
Yeah, but I think some people like I think it's really fair to-
let's
oh, sorry.
Doobie, and then yeah.
Yeah, I guess what would be interesting is just kind of figuring out where the line is, right? So like, most of you are pretty young, I think. I don't know about you guys, but when I was my late 20s, mid to late 20s, I spent a lot of time in the club scene in LA, where girls would take a bunch of shots and then go around the club rubbing their asses on people, right, and groping guys on shit, right? So if I partook in that, and I did all the time. Making out with random chicks, fingering them and shit, like right on the dance floor while they're extremely drunk. And I know they're drunk because I just saw them take a bunch of shots. Did I rape that person? Could she not consent to coming over and rubbing her ass on me? I don't know where the fucking line is to that, right? And I think we need to figure out where that line is if we're gonna say that, hey, it's my responsibility to know that she's over the line of being able to consent.
I think the line has to do with her behavior, right? Like we can't possibly know other people's mental states, right? Like that's not how mental states work. All we do is make inferences based on their behaviors, right? So I think in instances like that, you have their behavior does indicate a form of consent. So it seems to me pretty clearly that that's not. What do you mean?
But we wouldn't know who they are.
Rubbing their ass on you. Or
yeah, hold on, but so if a woman gets really drunk and she's like rubbing her ass on a guy, that's like consent to like fuck her.
I mean, it's not consent to fuck her, but like
what if she's had those 14 shots, right? Yeah, because she's at the club with her girlfriends or whatever, and they're in a mood to go around and dance and to throw their tits at people, right? Which women like to do, and men enjoy it very much. So if this is happening, right, and I know she's had a ton of shots, why is it my responsibility to know when she's over the fucking line? I don't know why you'd hold me responsible for her behavior at that point.
Right.
I mean,
I think this is where we're getting to, is that I don't know how we got into sexual assault land specifically or consent. I guess if we want to be here, but this is the issue that we get into with actually specifically sexual assault cases in Canada, is that typically consent is a really blurry, hard thing to determine. And when we're saying she's too intoxicated to consent, it's basically what the jury and the experienced witness, if we're assuming this goes to trial, decides is too cognitively impaired. Because even though we have quantitative measures of cognition, we can't apply them exactly in that moment. So the best we can do is apply quantitative measures on person's self-report of the past and stuff like that. So this is actually getting into the issue of that in sexual assault cases, it's extremely difficult because oftentimes, and most sexual assault, we're acting like the guy's sober. Usually in this case, the perpetrator is also drunk, right? So she might be saying, yeah, and shaking her head, cueing no, but he's drunk and doesn't really notice her head. He just notices movement and hears something that sounds like yes, and he's also drunk, right? So this is actually getting into the lines of sexual assault cases specifically, where it's actually really tricky. We don't have these hard lines. We're kind of doing the best we can with what we have available. And to be honest, we're doing really poorly. Most sexual assault cases don't go to anything. Most of them don't get tried. And then we also have this flip issue of are we potentially incarcerating people who didn't really commit a sexual assault? It was just a weird blurry consent. So the sexual assault thing and consent is a very, very blurry conversation.
This is why I think it's really, really.
Oh, so I said Franklin Layman.
Oh, I thought you said. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear Franklin.
I will totally let you go to it. I just wanted to tell two cases that might be relevant here. RV Ewanchuk is a famed case from Justice Loretta Bay, who is known as the Canadian RBG. She was big on dissents, but she was really hard when it came to criminal. Ewanchuk is the case where someone kept going and kept going oh, the person said no. I wait a couple seconds. Okay, and I go again. Oh, no, they say no. Okay, well, finally, this person feels pressured enough to say yes. So that's where they articulated this active yes standard that we all kind of seem to operate on. And it's extremely difficult to understand when someone is actively saying yes. You can use body language. You can suggest, oh, well, this person is continually saying yes. But it does also in the real world. And this is where I'm going to give some examples from law school. People would be yeah, but I don't hold to that standard. I know that's the criminal standard, but here's something weird that happens. So the other case I wanted to bring up, because this is this is an interesting one that gets debated a lot, is there's a case called JVA, also affectionately known as the dildo in the butt case, which is when two people were having consensual sex. One of the parties asked to be choked. The person wanted to be choked until they were unconscious. They were. Then the person decided to insert a dildo without permission. When that person awoke, they were I did not ask for this to occur. And we had made clear rules beforehand. And this was not part of them. So After that occurred, there were major concerns about, because that person broke up with the person, came forward with the sexual assault a couple months later, and there was a debate about whether that was an assault. What happened was the court held that a person who is incapacitated, like completely not conscious, cannot consent. There's an interesting dissent from the rest of the court who said, that's a weird standard I don't know if we should set, because what if I want to kiss my wife on the cheek while she's asleep? That would technically meet the standards for sexual assault. And basically the court said, that's de minimis, which is some more Latin for like, there's no way someone would bring forward that type of charge. Which is the problem, is a lot of these cases will come down to, do you want to come and bring this to court? Are you willing to make the effort to go testify, to have someone cross-examine you, to be re-traumatized if you were sexually assaulted, for all these things to happen? And like half the people in law school, if you hear that case, are like, yeah, no, I've been asleep and my partner did sexual things to me and it was fine. Like that was our thing. I always told him you could wake me up with X. So like it's a weird standard where it's like, this is criminal behavior. It's obviously occurring. Some people are okay with it. Other people are not okay with it. And it comes down to who's bringing forward that case. So we need better standards, but when you apply them generally, you're going to catch some people that are probably doing things that we all might say are acceptable or not. I don't know. I can't see inside your brains. What do you all think?
I have clearly underestimated Canada. All right, shit gets crazy up north. So
shit gets crazy everywhere. You just don't hear about it.
No,
okay.
That's why we have those sunshine laws in Florida, right? That's why I have Florida, man. Go ahead, Lee, man.
Yeah. That was really interesting, Franklin. I would contest the idea that a kiss on the cheek is sexual necessarily. I mean, it can be, but I don't think it necessarily is a lot of the time. But still, I understand. Anyway. So I mostly wanted to respond to what Erudite said, because I think she was getting at something really important when it comes to like blurred lines, and when it comes to an issue that I have in general, I guess, with society today. We live in a society with like club culture and like making like diminishing like the value of sex to the point where it's just kind of this like casual thing that we just kind of throw at each other and do with each other, because it is a very risky thing, and there's a lot of ethically ambiguous issues that can come from that. And I think that goes back to the conversation we had earlier about like instilling the responsibility amongst people to just like I think that people should probably just not be putting themselves in these sorts of situations in the first place. So like if you're in a club where you know everybody's like kind of fucked up, whether they're drunk or high or whatever, and then some random person who you don't know, might be hot, but you don't know them, comes up and starts grinding their ass on you and shit, like maybe you should just step away from that situation. As tempting as it may be, it's probably for the best to step away from that situation, just so you're not roping yourself into having to deal with those blurred lines to begin with, because it doesn't seem like that's something, because it seems like we've been trying to figure this out for so long now that I don't really think it's going anywhere. And I feel like we're not instilling that responsibility enough to probably not put yourself to like, what do you do to make sure that you're not even in that situation in the first place? Enough. Like mostly when it comes to men, I think with women, they get a lot of pressure to do that a lot. But I think like with men, that pressure and that responsibility is put on a lot less in general. So I think that's a good
Sorry, what's the situation?
I feel like it's kind of
not in.
Whoa.
Layman doesn't like club culture, basically.
Yeah.
So what is? Yeah, but you're saying don't get yourself into that situation. Which situation specifically?
Well, I said what the situation is specifically. So if you're in a club, right? If
pretty
you're
much
clubbing,
the doobie situations that he outlined, like.
Well, yeah. So So well, let me just So like what I'm saying is like, for example, you're in a club, you're clubbing, okay? You're not just like getting a drink with like a couple friends after work or something. You're clubbing. Someone is, so you know that like people in this environment, they're probably not sober. They're probably either drunk or high as fuck on some shit. They're off their fucking rocker. Someone comes up to you and they start, and you're just there, just chilling. Someone starts like grinding on you, touching you, doing sexual shit to you, and maybe you enjoy it. even if you, what I'm saying is like, even if you enjoy that, like the best thing that you should probably do is to probably just like step away from that situation. Because with sex, something that I don't think, mostly with men, like I have in mind again, like on average, it's not really like pressed enough that like this is like a very, very risky and dangerous action that you're engaging in, right? Even though there's a lot of pleasure that comes from it.
That's like the point of clubs.
Going, like someone hits on you and you you go along with it. That's the dangerous action. Like you're in a club.
I didn't say hitting.
And a woman comes up to you. And
I didn't say hitting on someone.
No, it's risky. Hold on. He's outlining that there's a risk. It's inherent. Like most sexual encounters have some level of risk for both partners, right? Like women are at risk of having things done against them against their consent, and they can't physically overpower the men. Men are at risk of potentially having a faulty sexual assault claim. Like sexual activities are risky. Now, I don't agree with Leyland's prescription specifically, but when we're talking about risk, like let's be honest, when we're talking about sexual encounters, there's always a level of risk. That's actually part of where some of the tension comes from, is the inherent level of risk of like, is it a
situation where a woman comes up and starts grinding on you seems like the least risky, one of the least risky situations in terms of like
putting your fingers in her?
That woman's interested in you.
That's a risky.
Doobie was
putting your
talking
fingers.
about
Doobie talked about putting it. So she was grinding on him, and he
I
put
was
his
talking
finger
about
in
like
her.
yeah,
so
I was
like
talking
I
about
wouldn't
people,
say
like, grinding on you. They are
is
doing
consent
sexual
for-
things to you. You are in the situation already where sexual shit is happening to you. Very explicit, like sexual engagement. I'm not talking about just flirting with somebody. That was something last year said. I'm not talking about flirting.
And
like,
and
hot,
in this situation, right? But like, okay, so let's. Doobie, we'll use you as a dummy here, right? A test dummy. If Doobie, seeing this very attractive woman, we're going to assume she's very attractive, right? She comes up to him. She's grinding her butt against his erect penis, right? That's happening right now. She didn't ask him to do that, right? She didn't come to him and like, hey, is that okay? Can I put my butt on your, like, that alone would be sexual assault, right? Like, right? And then that sounds like, hey, I want to do stuff, right? I'm interested in stuff with you. And he takes it a step further. Like, okay, you've done something sexual to me. I'll do something sexual to you.
What I'm illustrating is...
But no, not just for you.
To be super clear, I feel like I need to like spell this. You don't like immediately stick your finger in her, right? You'd grope around a bit first to like test water.
So,
but yeah,
and that's the thing is like groping around. It's like, okay, the girl coming up and grinding you was one level of risk. She didn't really get your consent. She came up, took a risk, and it paid off. And that's why sex is oftentimes risky. Like unless you're doing the really like straight shot, like, do you want to have sex? Can I grind on you? Which, let's be honest, nobody's doing that at clubs, right? And so it's like this level of like, you're taking these risks, but let's be aware that they're risks.
So yeah, this conversation feels so internet based. like I don't know. If you go to the club, like I don't consider that to be a risky behavior. Like if you go to a dance club, the concept of people grinding or dancing with you is like. No,
I want to clarify something.
I'm not coming at you.
Get misrepresented a lot.
There's usually substances or alcohol involved. I think that's the key component. It's not just it's not just the dancing part that's the issue.
Yeah, I want to clarify. I was saying if you go to the club and you are in the sexual situation, I'm not saying don't go to the club ever. Go to the club.
Well, I mean, that's what clubs are for, though. So you kind of are, right?
Clubs are not just for fucking. Okay?
They're not just for that, but like to stay
Layman's one of the guys that goes to the club to dance.
One of the major appeals of the clubs are that like people's inhibitions are kind of like lowered. There's a social expectation, I guess, for more new interactions and stuff.
There's things you agree to that wouldn't be appropriate other places.
You're in a space where many people are on you, like looking to put their dicks in things like that.
But you're risky. In the case of Doobie, if the woman turned around and said, "You sexually assaulted me," she'd be right, but that's not because it's objective. This is the thing with sexual assault. We act like sexual assault is a subjective thing. And in some cases, it is the subjective, clear thing. But in most cases, it's up to one of the parties to basically, especially when we're doing implied and implicit consent, because all of this bar stuff is implicit consent exclusively, right? In that case, it's mostly up to the person to decide at any point. So like saying like, well, one's sexually assaulting you, so you should sexually assault them back and stuff like that. Like that's not really what's happening. At this point, you're like doing dangerous behaviors. Like to be honest, I also like wouldn't recommend that if a girl grinds on you that you should stick your finger in her. I think that's like a really bad choice to make. It's a really bad choice. And if the girl turns around and says, that wasn't okay, and I'm calling the police, she would be in her right to do so, which is why I'm saying like these things are really blurry. Like they're exceedingly blurry because in the case of Doobie, I have no idea. But if she turns around, she's like, I fucking love that. That was so hot. Let's go back to my place, right? This risk that we would maybe say, like, it was kind of sexual assault. Well, do we get to say that when she's turning around, basically consenting and then asking like to escalate the sexual encounter? These things are really blurry, and it's I don't want anyone to act like these things aren't blurry and murky and very subjective.
That's what I was trying to get at too,
Yeah,
right?
so this is why I would say that it's just like, so I'm sorry, Layman, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't going to say much. I was just going to say it's a very sketchy environment. That's Erudite is seemingly the only person who understands my position.
So but I think most of us can like maybe grasp the social context of being in a club setting and people dancing on you and whatnot, right? But I think where it gets tricky is is when people are drinking a bunch of alcohol and whatnot, right? So if we know that this is like going to happen in a club, people are taking maybe taking drugs, drinking alcohol at the club, right? Why would it seems like you guys are saying that even with that being the case, right? These people intentionally putting themselves into a state of intoxication in a space where people are going to be sexual. This is primarily the reason a lot of these people are there. And then they go out and start rubbing their ass on people and dancing or whatever. Why am I responsible for knowing that this person isn't over the consent line? Why wouldn't that just be her responsibility?
I think that, and I don't. When I say this, I don't mean it as a pejorative. But Doobie is describing the type of dude we say that's like scaring the hoes. Like women cannot go to the club and have a good time because it's like, dude, like how am I supposed to know just because she grinds on me in a nightclub that I can't stick my finger inside her?
No,
like, and I know you didn't go there. I know
so I said earlier, you grope around
weird.
First, and then you escalate. Like it's like a slow
think that's
thing,
weird too. I think that's really weird. Like,
I think if a chick feels comfortable sticking her ass in my dick,
hands
like,
on some hips, like you can grab her waist. Y'all can dance.
She's gone way past hips. She's rubbing against my genitals. Like, why do I need to stick to the hip?
That's
just how people dance.
Hey, I'm just gonna jump in. Can I jump in?
That's what I'm talking about. Yes, take the responsibility from the woman in these situations.
No, escalation happens. It's how these interactions happen. That's how anything escalates to something more. Otherwise, all we'd ever do is like hold hands because there's never like permission to go one step further, right? Like obviously there's going to be.
But to be clear, I'm sure Jibby would agree. If you did that, and even though she was consenting to the grouping around, if you penetrated her and she turned around and said, holy fuck, dude, and then like wanted to call the police, would you agree that she would be in the right to do that?
I mean, legally, sure, but morally,
that was for Doobie 1%.
I would say, she would like legally, I guess, be in the right to do that, right? But I would claim that I was sexually assaulting her in self-defense because she sexually assaulted me first.
No, you wouldn't.
That's just wrong.
No, that's stupid. You know,
I think there's something to that, but I'm gonna wait for a second. Franklin, you go first.
I really want to say, like, this is what I was talking about, like with the social context element that is really important. Is I don't want to like just say like I 100% agree with Doobie and with Bam, like but unfortunately, like, yes, you would be on a legal level, you would be able to convict that person. What's going to happen is you're going to go tell a police officer that happened in a club, and then they're going to say, we're not going to press charges because it seems like both parties were involved, which is a real problem, that there's a lot of discretion when it comes to police if they're going to go forward with prosecution. Same thing with the prosecutor. If I'm a prosecutor and I see this come across my desk, I'm going to be like, well, I can get you a peace bond maybe that this person won't be able to come near you again, which is a restraining order in the States. Or I can probably get you like, I can maybe try for the charge, but it's going to be pretty hard because, you know, there's going to be other people that witnessed it. They might say like, oh, well, these people were engaging in sexual activity and it seemed like it was consensual to me. There's going to be the person like Doobie's going to say, yeah, I thought it was consensual. I was engaged in this behavior. If the person turns around and says like, don't do that, then first reaction would just be like, leave that person alone and go, you know, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that. You know, the most Canadian shit you can do. I think that's our socially acceptable standard, is most people would just like probably get out of there and probably be like, didn't intend to do that, I'm sorry, etc. Like, I think when it comes to the criminal standard, yes, you could charge. I just don't think people are going to do that. Like, I think the issue is when you do go back to someone's house and then there is more like elevation of that activity. And obviously we created sexual assault because we wanted to have blanket category that like shows that this is violent, this is wrong, this causes harm. but like it does catch everything. So you can have these scenarios where someone was like kissing you on the neck and you didn't like it versus something horrific.
I mean, that doesn't seem like a problem. That seems like Canada's legal system working as intended, right?
Yep.
Like,
I agree with you. It works as intended. I think the normative issue is some people would say this creates harm. This could create situations that people are extremely uncomfortable and that their sexual assault won't be prosecuted, even though they really did think that they were assaulted in that scenario, like Not So Erudite was explaining.
What if last you were gonna say something?
Okay, so the reason we think, like in this situation, the reason that it was wrong, what Doobie did was wrong, is because he went under the clothes and the woman stayed over the clothes, basically.
Wait,
right?
what Doobie did isn't necessarily wrong, though. I don't think we agree on that.
Okay, but the
I
people
would
who
say
think it is
socially he violated a contract, but like, is it right or wrong? It's really hard to tell, especially without like the other party here, right? Like a large portion of that is going to be like, does the woman feel like it was wrong, right? And I know that that's murky, right? Like, well, just because she feels, that's what a lot of this shit comes down to, because it's like sexual assault isn't this we pretend like it's so one and done and clear, and it's fucking not.
Yeah.
So like if she came into the panel, right? I'm assuming if she even exists, and was like, yeah, it was sexual assault and I was really uncomfortable with it, then I'd be like, yeah, he was wrong. He like bridged too far. He read the situation incorrectly and he violated the social contract. So yeah, because that's pretty risky. Like inserting yourself in a club situation is risky, right?
Well, but what she did was risky too, right?
I would say less
dancing
risky.
is-
Not
I
in
don't
a
think-
club.
Just different
It's
degrees
socially,
of
it's a
risk.
social expectation. It's a
Well,
like,
yeah, a little
if
bit
I go to the club and I don't
grinding
want to
her
hear
ass
music.
against Doobie's cock. That's also like, if Doobie didn't like that, she could be guilty of a sexual assault right there.
So when you go to
It's like
clubs,
a
do you
huge culture
typically
gap.
expect to be inserted in any way, penetrated in any way? When you go to a dance club?
No, I don't expect to
I'm
be
a dude.
grinded against either.
Yeah, me neither. But like, for example, if
I
you go
do.
to a sex club where lots of rampant sex is happening and stuff like that, it would be more likely to expect that you might be penetrated at some point, correct? Like say it's some sort of large kind of orgy,
Whole
maybe a
conversation
hotel
is
bought
making
out.
me off, right? Just with every other sentence.
When you go
Or
to
like
a dance
realistically,
bar,
just like a super Grammy club in LA, like it
Yeah.
doesn't
No,
have
would
to be a
twerk
sex
in
club.
Canada? Is that like against y'all's y'all's
Yeah,
laws
it's
or
not
something?
polite enough to twerk. We don't consider it polite.
right?
They
But
have
when you go to
party
a
houses.
Call it the
dance club,
maple
like a
syrup
grimy
shake?
dance club, it's pretty standard to expect that you're going to go there and you're probably going to end up like that. Just seems to be within kind of the social contract. But this is why I'm saying this is all ambiguous. That's why I'm not firmly
Yeah.
saying what he did was objectively wrong or right. I'm saying it's really dangerous. It's not something I would recommend because it's definitely an escalation. Going under the clothes is an escalation, obviously. Like,
Yeah, we all
right?
agreed
Dry
earlier.
humping
Yeah, we
is
all seem to
different
agree
than-
earlier
than-
that it is like there's an inherent ambiguity and riskiness to this. Maybe that's not quite been resolved yet because I'm still hearing people say, "Well, I sexually assaulted her. Well, she sexually assaulted me." And I feel like we haven't quite resolved that part of the conversation.
The reason I
There is a
hold
risk,
this
right?
position
So-
is because the opposite is true. I believe that a super common thing if you ever go to a club is like, oh, you see a girl dancing. Like in movies, everybody has a big conversation about it before, but maybe this is a song on. There's someone close to you that's dancing. You go up, you try to dance with them. You walk up. Maybe they're for it. Maybe they're not. And I think that's not something you're like, oh my goodness, we need to call the police. I think that is like a social expectation of the nightclub. That's the nightclub culture. If you don't if you're not okay with these things, I do think that like you probably shouldn't be in this space. Like there's like just a casual level of
Thought
like
of a good
or be
social-
explicit. That's your other option,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So when
I
there's
have
a
a good-
social norm at a space and you don't want it, just be explicit. So if somebody comes up to
Yes.
grind on you, just be like, hey, no, thank you, right?
Yes.
That's how you handle these situations
Yes,
if you still
I
want to be
would-
in the space.
And I would also, and to add to that, what I would also say a good rule to have if you're in the club is if you don't know, so not if like, oh, well, I don't know. Just assume like it's no. If you don't know, does that make sense? Like if you don't know what the
No.
boundaries are, if people can't really communicate, the
You'll never
boundaries,
know.
Maybe just like
You
just
just
have
try.
to-
situation.
You have to take some, like, you have to do something that you don't have permission to do. Even asking someone permission is something you don't have permission to do, right? Even
What?
making a move on someone is something that they might not like, and they might make them uncomfortable. But there's no
Sure.
way you can avoid doing that.
There's no way you can avoid it.
Right, but there's a different level of like rejection required, right? Like it's more uncomfortable to have to rip somebody's finger out of your vagina and say, holy fuck, stop, than it is to say, no, I wouldn't like it if you put your finger in my vagina. Both are uncomfortable, but obviously one is more uncomfortable, right? So like in general, what Doobie did, I would advise against because I think it's predatory. I think like we should maximize people's agency. And I think like jumping to that is a little weird, but I can't say it's objectively bad. And it's weird. I would prefer if I could, but like we can't make these things black and white.
It seems to me that there's a certain amount of escalation that you're allowed to do, right? That's the sort of unwritten social rule is that you can escalate things by some little amount each time without permission, and then you got to check, is this okay? And you got to get some sort of sign that okay, it was okay to escalate that, and now we're up to this level, and then we can do, like.
Yeah, but what we're getting at...
No, this is about social contracts in the space. Right? This isn't about escalation. This is about social contracts. When you go to a bar that's full of dancing and grinding...
What do you mean by social contract? You mean like social
when you
norms?
Social norms, which I would call the social contract. Yeah,
I think social norms...
This isn't about...
my understanding of social norms.
I'm clarifying.
Social norms are very particular to where you're
social
at.
Norms in a dance club isn't typically penetration. I don't think most people broadly expect to go to a dance club and get penetrated in any way. But they do expect typically to make out with somebody and grind on somebody. That's pretty standard. And so that's what I'm saying. Like this is why Doobie was really escalating, is because he was actually violating the standard social contract of that space. Now, if Doobie was in Congress and a girl came up and started grinding on him, that would also be a pretty big breach of social contract, and we'd all feel some kind of way about it, right? Because a large portion of like what makes us uncomfortable is when people violate the social norm contract, which does change by environment, and these things are broadly learned implicitly, which is why like fucking neurodivergent people are so fucked in all of these situations.
Yeah, that's
I
why
kind of disagree. I think that the social contract includes like a code of escalation. So yeah, it's true. Like I wouldn't expect someone, like it'd be really bad if you go up to someone in the club and start fingering them. But there is a, like, in my opinion, a social contract to escalation where if someone does something, then you can escalate a little bit and, you know, push, like not push as in. Like,
that's not social contract. That's not social contract.
I would say as much social
No, you're right.
Yeah, like that you're allowed to sexually assault people at the bar or in the club.
I just want to say, like,
before you do, I want to hear what you say. But like, I'm for this escalation term. Like, the more I'm hearing about this, like, I'm for escalation, and we're going to take Doobie as his word, right? Gospel truth. Let's assume that's exactly what happened, right? So in terms of escalation, right? I think you can escalate in the club, but also anywhere, right? So like, if the difference you're saying here is that, well, you don't expect to be penetrated, right? Well, people don't expect to do lots of things in lots of places, but they do them any which way, right? So like, you could be at a funeral, you could be at a viewing, right? At a funeral, like in a church. Well, at pews, right? And then you're a guy. There's a really attractive woman next to you. You two have never met, but somehow, some way, right? You guys start sending signals back and forth, and you know, first it's light touching, then caressing various places, and then yes, something gets inserted somewhere, right? Like that could happen in that situation, and those two people could walk away saying that was okay, even though like they both walked in there not expecting any of that to happen, right? So I think what Pan is trying to say in terms of this escalation thing, right, as a form of permission, what last username I guess was trying to say as well, like I think that just kind of makes sense. It's just kind of how people do things, right?
Sure, but there's the threshold for what's considered, right? The threshold for what we consider to like. It's there to be reasonable changes from situation. Yeah. Like crossing someone's boundary. Like if you're at a club and you're like walking by and maybe a guy, I don't know, grabs a girl around the waist, tries to talk to her or something, you know, feels her butt. He maybe he's a dick, maybe he's rude, but she's not like, I think there's a different level of offense. Like, God, there's always dicks at the club. I hate doing this, whatever. But she goes on about her day. Versus if she's at her mother's funeral and you like, oh, I'm so sorry, and you grab her butt and you're like, oh, I just missed the signal. That's way more inappropriate. Just because, like, even though the actions are completely the same, because of the social contract, the expectation for the space that you're in. Yeah, but two people can come to whatever. But I'm saying, but like two individuals can come to any conclusion that they want to. Like two people can do whatever they want anywhere. But that's not like I said, you're no longer dealing with social contracts. You're just dealing with individuals and consent, which are different things.
I know. That's why I'm rejecting erudite social contract theory here, right? And instead going with Pan's escalation theory, which doesn't often happen because I usually erudite's usually right. So let's go
and further, like why isn't, so if somebody goes through the steps of escalation, right? If she's very intoxicated while she's going through those steps with me, and why is it my responsibility to know that?
Frankly.
Why would we take that responsibility from her?
Frankly.
I was just going to say, I mean, I've heard Doobie tell this story before, and usually there is more of an element of escalation where, like, somebody grabs his junk. Like, there's more elements that seem to suggest that this time it was a little less nuanced and was like jump straight to the thing.
I don't think I imply that I just like shove my finger in, right? There's always I'm not weird enough to like just shove my finger
I don't know.
Like,
you're a frog. Honestly, it could be anything, really.
I guess that's fair.
I mean, I will say, on the other hand, we don't want to create like expectations of spaces in some ways because it can cause harm. So, for example, I'm pretty ace, but I've been to a lot of gay clubs, and let me tell you, things happen to you, whether you want them to or not, and it's pretty bad a lot of the time. So, like, we don't want to create an expectation because that's a more free-flowing place that people do engage in a lot more sexual activities. If you've ever been in the bathroom when the doors are knocked off and people are doing poppers. So, I mean, like, we're all kind of okay to some degree, but we don't want to create social expectations of specific places that something is more acceptable or less acceptable. And I think everybody's kind of articulated, like, the standard seems to be as long as that person can,
right?
Yeah, as long as you can say, I don't want this, you know, and can walk. Like, they have to have that.
I completely reject that, specifically because, like, for example, I've ended up going to a gay club with my girlfriend because she wanted to go to a drag show and her friends ended up canceling on her. They had a great time, whatever. It was a cool night. But like I seen another straight couple in there, and like, and from this expectation, I'm in this club, guys were hitting on me, like bragging. Whatever, because I'm cute, whatever. You know how it goes. I'm a cute dude. But anyways, guys were hitting on me, and there is a different level of expectation. Like, could I be offended? Like, do they think I'm gay? What's wrong with them? And like have some like violent outrage because of the situation? Or should I like? I think the reasonable thing was to expect like, oh, okay, I am in a gay bar, I am in a gay club. Like this, people are gonna hit on me, and I have to be fair because I'm in their space. I'm in a space where this is the social expectation. When you see men hit on men, and that's more casual for that thing. That wouldn't necessarily happen. Like that doesn't happen the same way in like in the general public. So like saying that like I think we're not being honest if we believe that like social contracts don't exist and things don't depend on where you're at. I think this is how everyone exists in the world. It's the reason you whisper in the library.
No, I'm saying I understand that. I get that it exists everywhere. It's just that hanging your hat on that in those interactions following those, right? So like my point is saying, despite that social contract, despite like being in Congress, right, shit happens in Congress. Like if those walls could talk, right, mostly be about corruption, but sometimes it would be about shit like this, where things that if you describe them, if you gave a description of the actions, you'd say that is inappropriate for that space, right? There's not the expectations that we have for that space. However, to those two participants, yeah, it was fine, right? Like there was some sort of escalation there. They came to that space expecting to pass laws and steal from the American people, but still, an interaction happened, right? Maybe a once in a lifetime interaction, and it turned it from a gentle like touch of like fingertips to someone got finger banged in the cloakroom, right? Like these things happen, and people can walk away despite being inappropriate, right? Saying that was amazing, right? And never talk about it again, but that was amazing. So
sure, the implications of it going right are fine. I'm just saying the implications of those situations going wrong have different consequences, I believe.
Higher stakes.
Yeah, higher stakes.
The level of risk is higher. Yeah.
I think it's just about how much you can escalate, right? Like in a club, you can go up and start grinding against someone. In Congress, you can't. That doesn't mean that you can't end up you know, like any kind of sexual activity happening in Congress. It's just that it's going to be a little more difficult to sort of get it happening, because you're gonna have to be a little more careful about how you escalate things and propose things, right?
Right, but the level of risk is the moment. Like if you're at a funeral, right, the social norm is not typically to have sex with people. So the level of risk there that you're really risking is the moment you initiate any level of like sexual contact, right?
Yeah.
So whether that's like running your hand, kind of like whatever it is, right? Because at a funeral, it's probably going to be really subtle, right? But that the moment of running the hand is the high risk behavior, because that person could turn around and be like, "What the fuck are you doing? I'm at a funeral," and like reject you really hard, and then go back to it, right? Whereas at a bar and club, the line of like when we're like more at risk is going to be a little bit different, because the social norms are a little bit different. And so like this is why the escalation thing I think gets really tricky, because like escalation is really, really hard to quantify. It's not a super clear thing, and based on the norms that you're in, escalation is going to look a little bit different. But like, yes, between individuals, I also generally try to concur of like the norms you should use between two people, or the contract that you want to set should be broadly between like mutual escalation to explicit consent, right? I think that those are good lines to have, but we're kind of having two separate conversations, which is like the interaction of consent between two individuals versus what type of sexual activity you broadly are going to expect in different venues, and like what's appropriate in different venues.
I wanted
Well,
to.
I don't think there's any. It's not about
you
what's
can go first.
appropriate ultimately in the venue. It's about how you get there. Like what.
Actually, about what's criminal actually is more, I think,
That
our
was the
original
point of
conversation.
conversation,
It-
yeah.
it's not about what's appropriate, it's about what's criminal.
Well, I mean, I think when it comes to what's criminal, the criminal standard should probably be strict, as in leaning is only the most egregious thing should be criminal, especially since it's so, you know, if the norms are so difficult for us to quantify, and they change depending on the place you're in and everything, then it seems like the law should err on the side of people not committing crimes.
What do you
right?
mean by egregious?
What do you mean by egregious? Yeah, that's
Yeah, we
pretty
need.
ambiguous term.
Yeah, that's a little vague.
Was was there anything
I don't know, but it
egregious
would
in
have to
Doobie's
be-
scenario?
Probably not.
What if
think
she
they're-
felt there was?
Yeah.
I mean, from her perspective,
I
there
don't
would be,
think
but
what
legally,
someone
probably not.
feels. I don't think that should be relevant to whether someone committed a crime. I think it
But
should
that's
just
typically
be
what
about.
progenites charging, right? Like typically it's if a victim, I could be wrong, Frank can correct me, but my understanding in that case is whether it's egregious or not would be the woman deciding to make a claim to the cops, and to some extent the cops agreeing that it's egregious enough to pursue a charge. Would that be
Well,
a
obviously,
good
for it to
understanding
be a
of
crime,
charges?
the woman would have to want to press charges and like not consent to it. But whether or not it was a crime, like whether or not she consented, I don't think should depend on. What am I trying to say? Like I don't think something that would constitute consent in terms of like what she said and did, could potentially be not consent because of what was going on in her mind, right?
Yeah,
The
like
mind
it's
I
a
don't think
part-
Doobie should have to worry about what she's thinking. Doobie should just should only worry about, okay, she did this, she said this, she did this. That's consent, whatever, regardless of what she's thinking.
I mean, we moved back because, I mean, at that point, the issue is like, obviously, the actus reus has been met for sexual assault. We all agree that, you know, someone could bring this charge forward. At this point, we seem to be discussing more the societal norms, whether someone would bring that charge forward. If they did, whether it be treated seriously, whether or not it would, you know, move forward in the criminal justice system. Like, those are things that are like, because there's lots of criminal activity that happens every day. How many times do you speed and you don't get a ticket? It just is like, it comes down to how it is observed, who brings forward the charges, what evidence is brought. I mean, like lots of traffic tickets obviously go away if you show up and you do a really good job and the police officer doesn't have any evidence because they didn't have their radar gun going. Like you can run out of evidence and something won't be convicted, but the criminal offense did occur. And that's part of the problem too, is everybody has a strong understanding of what they believe sexual assault is. And they think that if someone isn't punished for it, then it isn't serious, or that it wasn't a problem. And it could very much be a problem for that person. That person could be traumatized. That person could need, you know, help and like some mental health treatment. And we should be encouraging that. And that's why I'm a huge supporter of victim services, even in cases where there isn't a successful conviction. I think helping people, if they feel, you know, I brought this complaint, I wasn't necessarily successful, but I do need some support because I'm experiencing this. I think like that's a very important thing that we should be encouraging, because obviously there's lots of people that believe that they have been victims of sexual assaults, and they haven't been successfully, like when they got involved in the process, it wasn't about them getting a conviction, it was about the state and the state's interest, and the state doesn't make out their claim successful.
So I
Right.
wanted to.
Well, a victim can believe
I wanted to.
that
Hold
they.
on. I wanted to like get to Doobie's other question for the our remaining time, because I mean you said it, and I don't think people took it seriously, but I think it is a serious question. Should it be on Doobie's shoulders, or anyone else? Doesn't have to be Doobie for this, right? But anyone's shoulders to be able to discern the amount of like alcohol another person has taken, right? So like, sure, like if a person is unconscious, right, like literally immobile, okay, that's a problem, right? But that's on the far end, right? Like within that the situation of a club, for instance, alcohol is being freely taken. People have different tolerances. If I think, as Erudite was talking about previously, is like about like cognition being like the limit, then like how should it be expected that Doobie or anyone else, sorry, should be able to measure this, right, to figure out if her cognition is at an acceptable level, right? Maybe
Criminally or morally?
maybe
just to
if,
clarify.
oh, legally or moral, we could say both. We could look, we could give an answer for both.
Let's pick one.
Okay.
No, I think we need to do both, because I think Erudite has a point that they're going to be different. I do think that legally he shouldn't be responsible, but he probably shouldn't if he can tell that she's really drunk.
If he watched two
think-
women, right, take the exact same amount of shots, right, and two women, again, all right, I'm gonna just use Doobie, sorry. Two women approached him, right, both of those women, same height, same weight, right, and one of them, it turns out, her cognition is sharp enough, and she consents to all the things that they get up to, right, and the other one just has a lower tolerance. Like, how should Doobie be able, expected to figure this out? But yeah.
I don't see why, if you're responsible for crimes that you commit when you're intoxicated, you should also be responsible for consenting to things when you're intoxicated. I don't think that you should be, when you're getting consent from someone, that you should be not legally responsible for figuring out if they might be intoxicated and if that might be affecting their decision. Keep in mind, if you're talking about someone like passed out or they're so intoxicated they can't communicate properly, that's different. But the issue there is not that they're intoxicated per se, it's that they can't even communicate with you. If they can communicate with you in the ways that are, whatever ways are required to consent, and they consent, then I think that's good enough. And if they sober up and change their mind, I think that's their problem, because they choose to get drunk. Just like it's your problem if you choose to get drunk and you commit a crime, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the kind of the inherent problem with clubs, is that the lines are always blurred. So like we've already talked about, and I'm sorry if I sound very anti-fun. I apologize in advance for being a fucking boomer about
Or
this.
Canadian.
Or maybe not a boomer, older than a boomer probably. But yeah, so like we already talked about this, where like the lines are inherently blurred. You're going in there with the social expectation that pretty much everybody's going to be drunk or on drugs and sexual, yada yada yada, and you have to prepare for that when you go into that environment. And you know, it obviously creates a lot of inherent risks, as we already talked about. Not to mention something that hasn't come up yet, is the fact that this is just like a breeding ground for people to just go in who are sober and engage in predatory behavior, of course. So I think like legally, if both parties are drunk, which is usually the case, or high or whatever, legally, I don't think they should be like, it's hard to hold people responsible for that unless there's like something very, very explicit, like what we talked about earlier. And I would just, you know, divert back to what I said earlier, just saying like, if you know that you're in a situation where the lines are blurred, just don't do anything. Just stay out of the situation. And I know that people don't like that, and that's very, very, you know, anti-fun or whatever, but like have your fun somewhere else and just don't put yourself in this situation in the first place. I know that people are going to get mad at that, but that's fine. And then, but like, so that's where I would say, like, just morally or socially, that's the case. And then legally, just like, it seems like realistically, you could only apply to like where things are very explicit, or like very like explicit like violations of consent and stuff like that, like sexual consent. Then you decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not it's assault or rape or whatever. And then yeah, I think that's it.
Let's go to Corey, Franklin, Bam.
Yeah, I think this speaks, at least to me, this speaks to a larger conversation, even just about. So I don't drink. I've never been drunk in my life, and some of the things that are brought up here, some of the reasons why, like at least whether legally speaking, like morally speaking, like I at the very least want to know that someone I'm having sex with is like actually a willing participant in that. I actually care about that. And I'd actually be more in line with you, last year's name, like in terms of like, you know, if you get drunk and you happen to end up unfortunately being assaulted, like that's sort of maybe the collateral damage. If we were better at talking
Not
about
assaulted.
sex.
I didn't say that you.
Yeah, no, I understand, but just use a more extreme case. But like, if we were better at talking about sex and teaching sex, then like, yeah, then if you willingly participate in consuming alcohol and all of the effects that happen, and like, yeah, that's why it gets so blurry. And like, as Erudite brought up, there's an inherent risk, and you should know that. But I think we're just really bad. Like one of the reasons why like alcohol, you know, is consumed. Like, what's another word for alcohol? It's liquid courage. You know, it lowers your inhibitions. If you need to consume that to either approach, like, I don't know for sure, but I'm sort of somewhat assuming that in Doobie's scenario, like of the woman pretty much going up to him and grinding against his erection, they're probably not all that sober. I'm willing to bet. And so like with that in mind, like if you require alcohol to like lower your inhibitions, then I think that speaks to something larger that we probably need to talk about.
Franklin, Bam, and Pam.
So, I mean, from a legal perspective, we assign the ability to assess whether someone's drunk to lots of people. In fact, a police officer, for that purpose, is considered a layman. They don't have any specialized knowledge, then yes, they're considered you. And they don't have any specialized knowledge other than, you know, that the general public have. So they have indicia of intoxication. They can see that someone is glassy-eyed. They can see that they're slurring their speech. They can smell alcohol in their breath. They have indicia that they use when they are determining if someone. So that is indications. Those are facts.
Why don't you just say indication?
I'm sorry. I use.
Because he's smarter than you, Doobie, obviously.
Yeah, his IQ was. Like,
it's just weird when people start using like foreign languages. Like,
I'm sorry.
You're just mad because you're going to get beaten in English and Latin, okay?
You're also mad.
On doit totalement parler en français, est-ce que tu veux? We're just going to do the whole thing in French. Okay. So there are some factors indicating that the person is impaired. They always use the word indicia. Even cops, and we know their intelligence, can use that word. No. But yeah, no, I think the issue there is that we assess that standard. We think it's pretty normal. You can guess how fast something is going usually based on other factors that you look at. We don't expect the average person to go, well, using this theorem, I have broken down how quickly this was accelerating. Like, most people just go, I don't know, he was going pretty fast in his vehicle. We accept that as evidence. So most of the time, like, we are weighing two people's evidence against each other. And I think that the standards criminally are set very high. We have RVWD, which is our Canadian standard for situations where there are two people that are telling a story. So if you don't believe the person's story, you still should find that they are not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt if there's other factors indicating it. That's for both parties. So both parties, you could believe the victim, you could completely disagree and not believe the perpetrator, and you could still find that they weren't guilty beyond a reasonable doubt because there were other factors contributing and other evidence that suggests that the thing didn't happen. So I mean, it's a pretty high standard. We keep the standard high because we don't want to send people to jail. We don't want to deprive them of their liberty for those facts. But on a moral level, I think a lot of people might look at a scenario and say, well, I don't think that's acceptable, or I think the standard should be X. And I think that's the problem is most people conflate what is criminal with what is acceptable, with what is civil, because there's a lot of things that we talked about tonight that you could absolutely sue for. Like there are tons of things that you could sue a person because they did the same damage that you wouldn't find them criminally responsible for, but you might want to hold them to that higher civil standard, especially if you injured them during one of these activities. They're going to be like, you punched me in the face. That's battery. I'm taking your money now.
Pam,
All right.
Bam and Pan, and then all right.
Okay, I'm gonna hit y'all with some free game right now. Like this is usually premium, but this is free game right here. Number one, don't stop trying to bring home drunk girls. It's not even cute. Drunk, it's like, especially if they're like sloppy drunk. Like it's not even fun. Like leave the drunk girl alone. Let her take somebody's hat and have a good night. Like she'll be fun. Let her run around. Like just do that. But you know, you can get her number at best. But say you find someone that's on the line, like, you know, like you met, you had a good time. I don't even drink, so that's one thing. But if you find somebody that have had a couple drinks, but they're interested in you, you wanna, don't leave the club with them. That's when I think people who try to pull that one, it just seems like a sketchy behavior. Whenever I see guys like try to like remove a girl from her group of friends and like sneak her out of the club, I'm like, oh, this is creepy. You're increasing your eyes right there. But so best case scenario, take her to Waffle House or your regional equivalent of Waffle House. Get some food in her. That'll, you know, like that'll, you know, sober up. Give her an hour and a half. Exactly. Yeah. To get whatever, you know, like make sure she's still sure about this decision. If she wanted to sleep with you at 2, she'll still probably be into it around 3:30. So if she actually wants to, and if she doesn't, oh well, go home. But yeah, get some Waffle House in there.
Anything Bam just said, it was all.
And if that, and like I said, but if she's not hungry, if you don't feel like eating, you just, you know, want to go home, you get her number, go home, hit her up. Now from there again, you'll have the Uber time, or where her friends dropping her off at the thing. Like she'll converse with her friends about it. Do you think I should go to this guy's house? Is my bad? Is that what I should do? And they'll walk her through it, whether it's a good decision or not. And then at best case scenario, she took the time to like get all the way to your house. And then from there, like hopefully, if she's not sober, don't do it. That's all. After all this, if she's not sober, still don't do it.
Come back,
but at least you're in a
sober.
better situation. You're in a much better situation when the girl literally left the club, came to your spot, like that was, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, wherever, however far you stay from your local bar or club. Like you have a much better conversation. For this girl probably wants it, but again, that's all you get. That's all you get for free.
Oh, that was terrible.
You got to pay for the rest. Okay. Pan.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to get mad at Layman like he expected us to, and saying we shouldn't, exactly, put ourselves in these situations. I would just say that people have different risk tolerances, and it's completely okay for people to want to do a risky behavior and for them to do it. I don't think there's anything morally wrong. I think it's a feature of clubs that people's inhibitions are lowered. I don't think it's like a bug. I think that's part of the reason why people go to clubs in the first place. And
I know
saying that it's wrong. I mean, I think that kind of assumes what level of risk that they should be taking. And if they want to take a risk, they want to, be bold. There's nothing wrong with that as long as they're prepared with, prepared for the consequences.
Well, I'm not against taking risks. I'm not against taking risks as a concept. I'm just, I just want people, right? Hold on. So I just want people to be careful, and I want people to be leery of when there are sexual risks. And I think that when it comes to boundaries, that is a very, very fundamental thing that you need to be able to discuss with some kind of cognitive, as Erudite said, rational capacity when you're engaging in a sexual interaction, and you need to be able to communicate those boundaries. And I'm saying that if you cannot communicate those boundaries in an effective manner, the lines are then blurred. And when those lines are blurred, it is for the best to step away from that situation if you cannot resolve that. That's the point I was making. I wasn't suggesting that nobody should ever take risks.
I get that, but I feel like it's okay that it's kind of a blurred line scenario as long as both like if both people wanted to put themselves in a situation that was, you know, the lines are blurry and stuff like this, I don't see anything inherently wrong with that. Yes, there is a higher risk of things happening that are considered very, you know, that are bad, but I don't think that's a problem necessarily.
It's
I
a
don't think
problem
that's what
if you.
he's saying. Like, I think he's like, that's why I brought up, like, I think we're really bad at, you know, just talking about sex and teaching sex. Like, I agree with you, rather, that there's nothing wrong with people knowingly engaging risky behavior, as long as they, like, there's sort of an informed consent aspect of, like, they actually know.
I'm not talking about consent specifically.
No, no,
I mean,
I
consent
mean
is
in terms of,
important,
like,
but
just the knowledge of, like, the actual level of risk you're engaging in, and, like, just what you are stepping into.
what
I
I'm
mean, like,
touching on right now
Anybody
is
wanna
I'm
answer Prime's
trying to
question?
talk about I'm
Says no.
trying to talk about communicating boundaries and being able to communicate boundaries and having the cognitive capacity to communicate boundaries. Clubs like inherently discourage that just because of the way that they're set up. So I'm saying going to the club is fine, but you got to be able to do that. And I understand that's not very fun. It takes a lot of the fun away from the clubs. I fucking get it. I don't give a shit. Sorry.
Hold
I
on, but
would
like
rather people
this
be,
shit about like a
sure and
take
responsible
them
in
to
their
Denny's or whatever. Like I don't want to get to know the person. The only thing I want to know is what they feel like on the inside, right? That's it. I don't give a fuck about the personality. I don't want to have dinner. I don't want to know shit about them, right? So like the thing about, you know, spend some time with them,
know your
let
insides
them
look
talk to their friends first. Like it's just sometimes you're at the club, there's a horny woman, she might be drunk, you might be a little drunk too. So like what's wrong with that being it, and that nothing more complicated than that.
degeneracy, you
Why do we
fucking
need
frog.
why do we need to get the
degenerate
friends
fucking frog.
involved and go to
That's the
fucking
problem with
Denny's and pretend that I want to talk to her or know anything about her fucking life? I don't.
You don't.
Right.
You don't have to do
Like,
any
why
of
is
these
it-
things. We
Okay, but
discriminate
why is it my
personality and-
responsibility to know that she hasn't crossed the line of consent?
I didn't
Because
say
at
it's
some
yours.
point, you might be criminally culpable as well for not reading things. And to be clear, we're not always just talking about mind reading here. For example, drunkenness is not so much a state of mind, it's pretty obvious. For example, I think Doobie and Username, would you guys both be opposed to, example, having sex with another person who's so drunk that they cannot walk, speak, or even form like any level of coherent movement? Like they're basically just passed up and they're not
Yeah,
unconscious
but you don't.
yet.
Yeah, of
Would
course,
you
but
be
you don't need
opposed to
to be
that?
there.
Just
They
wait.
haven't-
Would you be opposed to that?
I would
Yeah,
be
of-
opposed to that because they
Okay,
haven't consented
great.
if they can't speak, right?
Okay, great. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
but,
then
but
what
that's
we have.
but I think most of you would say that people are can be way over the line of being able to consent, quote unquote, far before the point where they can't speak and they can't like move or whatever, right? They might just be like they might seem like just like tipsy, but they're actually really fucking drunk, and there's no way for me to know which is which.
Right.
Right.
So I understand that. What I was trying to do is just ground it, being like, okay, so we'd all agree with the extreme. So now we do is we work our way back with the extreme to see like what we consider tolerable. And to be clear, we also haven't differentiated between criminal and moral, right? So like what Doobie's talking about, like I don't care, blah 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 blah, all this stuff. It's like, here's the thing: you can be kind of shitty, you can do risky behaviors. I don't think it inherently makes you moral, but there's risk. And if it turns out that the woman was conscious enough and she feels like she was sexually assaulted, she would be in the right to make that claim potentially against you. That is one of the risks that you're running with, which is why in general, particularly for like neurodivergent people, I tell them probably don't risk it because the chance of you reading wrong is pretty high, right? So it's like you can take it's the same shit I get into with like free speech people where they're like, well, I just want to be able to say whatever I want. And I'm like, well, you can say whatever you want sometimes, but like that doesn't make you suddenly like now not responsible for the social and like potentially criminal response that there might be to some of these things, right? Like,
I think this like the kind of language that we use surrounding this really like infantilizes women. Like Ben was saying, oh, a guy sneaking this girl away from her friends and out of the club. This is a fucking adult, right? Unless she's like falling over drunk, right? Maybe she's drunk, but she's not like unconscious, right? If she decides to go off and fuck some dude, right? That's her business, right? So I don't understand why like we need to kind of. It seems like we're tipping the scales heavily on the man's side of like responsibility. Right?
I mean, I
Let
think
her-
we all
Everybody is
answer the
responsible.
question.
Can we all agree on that? Just to lay this to rest, are both parties responsible for the situation that they get themselves into?
Okay, so let me ask you a
degree?
question. So hold on. So I'm gonna, because I'm curious. So if we go through the same fucking scenario, but I'm also drunk, and I finger her or I let her grab my dick or whatever, why couldn't I later say, hey, actually, I was too drunk to consent to fingering this person. She sexually assaulted me.
And I think that this
You
is part
could
of the
do
problem.
that.
I think part of the
Yeah,
problem
that
is
was-
So,
though, like,
do you think that'd be
that-
a
that
reasonable
sounds
thing to
very
hold her
silly
to say, "Hey, this dude's fingering me. How the fuck am I supposed to know he's too drunk to finger me?"
Well, this is why I really like the court system that like tries, for example, in the case of this situation, if it goes all the way to trial, it's going to be dealt with independently in its very unique facts, which is why I like the court system for this, right? You're going to have a jury, and we can talk about all the problems and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of issues within the court, but the idea of like, is this okay? It's like, I don't know. What are all of the unique factors around it? Like, what if like there's a whole bunch of like other evidence that comes out that like makes this whole situation seem way more sus and way more weird and stuff like that. Like, what if it turns out she didn't just have alcohol in her system, she also had like GHB, which is date rape, right? Well, now this all gets way more complicated, right? And so like this is why I'm like, you can do these risky things, but there are sometimes risks that come with it and you don't want to be caught out. So like when Bam's saying like, hey, my recommendation is probably don't be overly predatory, because that's probably our best moral practice, right? In general, I would say it's pretty morally good to not like go out of your way to do things that could be really, really damaging and hurtful to people just because like it feels good for your like dick, basically, right? I'm opposed to that because I think like best practice says like probably try to respect other people and give some level of like agency. You can choose not to do that. And that doesn't mean that you're immediately criminal, and that doesn't even mean that you're immediately immoral, but it's probably not best practice, right? Like we're all being so black and white. This isn't black and white on literally
not.
any level.
I just want to
black and
say,
white.
like, if you look at 33.1, when they passed it, and you can read the bill, the way that most criminal law, they'll put in like the reasons that they passed the thing. So they'll have like the purpose of the law that you're supposed to interpret when you read it. And they put in a bunch of factors, and that was why it was like relevant and used at the Section 1 analysis. Like they said, you know, women and children have historically been the victims of violence. So there is a built-in gendered element to a lot of sexual assault and assault that has been acknowledged by the courts. When you even look at like the LEAF argument, so that's the Legal Education and Action Fund, they brought an argument that was basically like, you have to look at Section 15, the equality provision, and look at how women are affected specifically by these type of offenses more than men. So I do think that they build in gendered elements, and everybody kind of in society goes, I guess we accept this as a standard that men are going to do this more often, or it's going to be more violent, or there's going to be this greater harm caused. And I think we have to undo that if we want to as a social prescription, but I do think it's unfair to say, oh, well, what happened if this woman did this? Because most people honestly are going to look at that and they're going to throw in their own biases and say, I don't think that was as bad.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what's been happening on the panel. The idea that like I might be a sexual assaulter for figuring some chick who initiated sexual activity by rubbing her ass on my dick, on my genitals, right? And yeah, then for her this is like a risky behavior, but somehow playing with my genitals is for her is less risky than if I were to play with her genitals. Right?
Well,
Like,
I think
feel
that's
like
just the
if there's risk on either side here, like if you're touching genitals, like you've kind of crossed the line of like of being able to call it like call it sexual assault, right? If someone else grabs your genital.
how we're
I think
describing
that-
touch is very ambiguous. Like I said, grinding over the clothes, like that. I think that's different from like
Why?
fit with your
No
hand.
way. No way.
It's a
No
hand
way.
job through the clothes.
You
like,
not
not
go to
a
the
hand
club?
job?
Have y'all ever
Here's
been
the
to a
thing.
club?
Here's the thing. Things are biased against men when it comes to sexual assault overall. Like I think we would all agree with that. Like that is obvious to me, right? If that was even if she full on reached in your pants and grabbed your dick, you'd probably still have a harder time pressing it than she would if you inserted your finger. And assuming that all of the same situation is true, you're touching and touchy, and she gropes over top before she like slips her hand in and stuff. Like you're right, there is this imbalance against men, right? But that doesn't really change like this like more theoretical like moral thing. Like if we want to talk now descriptively about what happens in reality, we can also do that.
I don't know. Yeah, wait. What do you mean? No way. Like people grind at clubs. That is very.
I know. I get that they do that, but in terms of, I'm isolating the action, right? The action is that you are touching someone's genitals, right, without their consent. You did not. You just kind of went and did it, right? Because you use your femoid privilege, right? And you decided that I'm going to do this, right? And you felt entitled to Doobie's crotch.
But it's not just girls. Guys do this too. Like if a girl, girls can be dancing with their, girls can be like twerking with their group of friends, and a guy can walk up onto it and like just try to dance with it, and that's super normal.
Like, and they're like, and oftentimes what happens, they'll push them away, right? You've seen it happen. It's happened to you.
You say no.
Unless maybe you're not on that level. Maybe you're a super chat and it doesn't happen to you at all.
No,
but like,
it happens. But it happens, and it's like, all right, cool. But nobody's assaulted in that situation.
And but no. You could say that she was. You could say
no.
But like that.
Why?
Didn't consent to any of that, right? That's her butt. We understand that it's a sexual area, and then you put your dick up to her, your clove dick up to her butt. If that happened on the train,
would it be different if like I put my gloved hand up to her crotch? Right? Like what's the?
No, but I'm saying grabbing like your hands are like that's like saying like, oh, somebody pat you on the shoulder, but like I didn't consent to this. This is like no, there's an expectation for
patting someone on the shoulder sexual.
But I don't think dancing in a club is sexual. I don't associate that with
sexuality. On
sexuality.
Someone's dick in a club is sexual?
No, what?
What?
This could be completely cultural. This could be very, very cultural. Like this could be a huge cultural. This could be a huge cultural gap. Like I go to a lot of black clubs. Everyone just dances. Like with your friends, you just
the
walk
dancing
away.
you're talking about is like simulating a sex act, like literally, right?
I mean,
yeah,
the exact example we were
that's
given was someone was grinding on Doobie's erect dick. How is that not sexual?
I didn't know his dick is hard. I didn't know when that happened. I wasn't aware of that part of the conversation.
If you can have some chick grinding on your dick for 5 minutes and not get hard, like you're a fucking god, okay? Like I don't know what to tell you.
Or your impotence.
Why y'all getting hard in the club, bro?
Look, if there's an ass on my dick, like I'm a red-blooded American, okay? It just happens. I can't help it.
Yeah, like I said, what you do is like just don't be clingy. I've probably danced with 400 girls that I don't know their name of because you don't ask them. You dance because it's a great song. You dance and you walk off. You go back to your friends. You don't even talk anymore. We don't even have to discuss this. This was just in the moment thing. Like this is a super normal thing. Maybe it's because Twitch people like don't go to clubs. Like maybe that's the thing. Like
I don't know why you're assuming that like. Okay, so yeah, it's true that sometimes you just dance with somebody and that's it, right? But there are other times where you do it and it escalates. Right?
But you say like, I'm
not saying it's going to escalate every single time.
Come on, you definitely wanted it. We're
Listen,
like, no. What's up?
I'm really confused by you because earlier you were really, really pressing really, really hard that clubs are like these inherently like sexualized sexual environments.
No,
now you're acting like, well, if she rubs her fucking dick, her ass on your dick, then like that's not sexual. Like what the fuck? And that's like. I'm so confused. I don't understand.
What I'm saying is that clubs like it's not sexual because of the threshold. Like basically this whole and it doesn't mean that she wants to have sex with you. This space is inherent. Like I believe that the club space is inherently a little bit sexual. So that doesn't mean that every interaction you have with a person in there that would like in another circumstances would be considered coming on to you doesn't meet that threshold now.
What's the inherently sexual part of going to a club if like that example is not factored into the equation at all?
I'm saying like the concept of someone
getting fingered by Doobie.
I am asking, bam.
I'm saying the concept of someone getting you a drink or someone dancing with you, even grinding on you, someone having like a 30-second conversation with you. No, I'm saying these things don't meet. These aren't. But because if these things happen to you in a club, I wouldn't consider that like, oh, this person wants to have sex with me. I like, but in any other place, like, well, not in any other place.
But what's the sexual part of clubs then?
The sexual part of clubs is. I think it would take more than that. I think it would take like it does become more explicit. Like I think it would be someone like talking about like, oh, you know, can I get your number? You know, do you want to get out of here? What are you doing later? I think the threshold of what you expect, like, oh, this person is coming on to me, has to be way higher in a club than like it would be in a regular circumstance. Like if someone just talks to you,
whether something is sexual or not.
I think
you do it with your grandmother. If you wouldn't do it with your grandmother.
I mean, my grandmother doesn't, but I've definitely been in spaces where like grandparents, like
no, it's got to be your grandmother, not someone else's grandmother.
No, wait. You've been to a club? Is there a club where grandmas are at?
It's not even necessarily clubs. I'm saying that's what I'm saying. It could just be a cultural difference. Like
Hit me
the
up in the
concept of
DMs of
grinding
that one.
isn't that's inherently sexual.
Bam, I think the difference is how we're using the word sexual. Your version of the word sexual seems to mean is willing to consent to like sexual intercourse, right? Or something akin to that, right? Not
this
just something
person's attracted to you. Like,
Can,
that's what
can we
you
just be
believe
honest
that
that like Bam isn't saying anything really insane? Like for example, in 1820s, a woman showing her fucking ankle was viewed as sexual. Like sexuality within cultures can absolutely change. I would argue for the most part in North America, yes, absolutely, Layman.
No. That's not what I'm disagreeing.
Okay,
with.
fair enough.
I'm not doing that.
Absolutely. Like
what I'm saying is that I don't think I was or anybody was like contesting that part of what he was saying.
if she grinds on you, do you think that means she wants you? Like she's super attracted to me. I think that you can grind on a complete stranger. Like, oh, I have no attraction. I just like the song, and this happens to be a body that's close by. And girls can do that, and they walk off.
Grinding.
Okay.
Well, this would depend on what the definition of is. We're gonna have to go back to the old school Clinton meme.
But my bad, Aaron. I cut you off. Sorry about that.
I was just going to say, like, these cultural things can shift. And so, like, can I picture, like, within some cultural, like, norms where, like, grinding is significantly less sexual? Like, yeah, I actually can picture it. In our society, at least, like, I'm going to just speak for, like, white, more, like, dominantly Canadian society, grinding is inherently very, very sexual. But, like, I feel like at this point, I'm going to be honest, I think we're also splitting hairs a little bit here. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys do want to fight about whether or not grinding is sexual or not.
It could be a Canadian thing. You're right, absolutely right. I have no idea.
I think it ties into the overall problem.
Where is grinding
I think it ties into the overall problem earlier though of just like the lines being blurred and determining like it because if we can't even agree on like what a sexual action is in a club, we can't even have the other conversation about like the boundaries and all that shit that would go back into like Doobie's examples.
We know what a sexual act is in a club.
Right?
Whatever
that's
we say
kind of
in
the
a
issue
panel.
with this. That's
we're
that's
actually
the heart
in there
of it.
doing it. We know, right?
Right. So this is like typically what is a sexual act is determined in large part by the culture. Like I would broadly argue grinding is somewhat level of a sexual act, similar to just like I think like flirting is a little bit of a sexual act. It's not like the most overt and the most intense. I don't think it's like a huge strong indicator of like where you could go next with that. But like yeah, I think grinding is like broadly generally viewed as a little bit sexual, but yes, of course there can be some cultures that don't view grinding like as inherently sexual. Like it of course it's feasible. Human beings are very capable of coming up with very strange social behaviors.
I think the problem seems to be where we're like tying this into assault. For example, if I see daggering, I'm gonna think that looks pretty sexual, but it could be just like a fun thing to do. But
People
like,
want you to explain daggering for us.
Oh, so daggering, big in like Caribbean, where you full on like are like grab the person and like thrust in hard, but it's a dance move, and honestly it could be a completely non-sexual dagger. I think the issue is that when you're dealing with like what's sexual, obviously there are connotations of what something is sexual. I think the assault part is the problem. It's the when is there consent, when can you read that out, because like lots of things could be sexual. We can go down the horrific RGR foot discussion if we want to on what's sexual apparently, but let's not. So yeah, I think that's the problem, is like we're getting focused on the sexual part. We should be focused on like the when can you figure out if there's an assault occurring? And I think alcohol makes things more complicated, but generally there are social norms. People do have some standards. Whether we'd want to hold Doobie accountable in this horrific issue of his is a completely different thing. I think you can have different standards about what is morally acceptable. I'd say most of the time I'm not out fingering the club, but you do you.
You would if you could. You would if you could.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I don't do it if you're not a Chad. I'll say that. I feel like that's actually the important part of this that we didn't discuss. But okay, we'll move on. We're actually even over time. So thank you to everyone who showed up. Much appreciated. We are going to go to our open walk-on panel right after this. The content does not stop, so if you're new here, hit that follow button. Make sure notifications are on so you know I'm going live. We're not going to end. I'm just going to give it an exit. These amazing individuals, but we still have more content. Before then, hey guys, after you follow this channel, we got plenty of social media, right? So hit us up on Twitter for tweets about stuff, right? On Discord, Heart and Soul of the Community, we do everything on Discord. We have that walk on panel on Discord, so come and join us. We got a new thing. I mean, I've had it for a while, but I just haven't did anything with it. We got TikTok, so check out our TikTok. Follow us on TikTok right there. Yeah, we got like 2 videos up. In fact, the last one I just put up has our friend Erudite in it. So that'll be fun. So check that out. It's actually extremely sexual too.
Of course it is. Every time I come on here, you just flirt with me and you just call me your dommy mommy. Next time I'm coming on in full leather and a whip, all right?
Oh God. All right, don't put that image in my head, please. Oh God. YouTube. You'll find bots on YouTube. You'll find me being very embarrassed when Erudite comes on this panel and flirts with me. So yes, check out our YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, and hit that join button, become a YouTube member, and support us that way as well. All right. And yeah, TikTok. Hit us up on TikTok. Like the videos or whatever the fuck you do on TikTok. I actually don't know. I'm putting clips there. All right. So. Moving forward, we're gonna give an outro, but remember the content continues. Start with my man Bam. Bam, thank you for coming through. Bam, you are always a great ad for these things, like a great get. I'm like, oh, I'm so happy Bam's around because he's gonna make some points, right? Whether I agree with him or not, they'll be fun to deal with. So
Yeah, no, like I said, I apologize for not being. Like, there was only so deep I could go with the legal stuff. Like, I saw what they were talking about, but I am a layman, if you will, when it comes to this type of stuff. So I got more engaged once we got into like the social element of it and like the types of prescriptions. I think that all these conversations are super, super confusing. And as we said again, it's going to depend on the person you're dealing with. It's going to depend on the culture you come from and the social expectations. But yeah, like I said, I'm a Bam. I come on primes. I talk about stuff. I give the correct positions, and I make everybody a little bit better for it. Thanks.
all right. He's great. So next, hey, why don't we go in clockwise? We'll do it that way, right? So because I said so. Layman, thank you for being here as well, right?
This is anti-clockwise.
This is anti-clockwise. This is true. Thank you for that. Fucking lawyer, right? Like, swear to God. Let's Layman. Layman, this is the one time I won't make you apologize for being Canadian because it actually came in handy this time, right?
Yeah, get everybody to apologize, right? So, not that that's a difficult thing for us to do, right? I mean, that's kind of the whole ethos. That and not being American. Apologizing and we're not
and being
American.
Second best. Got it. Yeah, sure. Thank you for coming through. Seriously appreciate you. You're a great spirit to have here because you're a lot of fun. So Layman, tell Lord about yourself.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Layman. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about similar shit that I talk about here. I'm probably gonna upload this conversation onto my channel because it was actually pretty fucking cool, super interesting, super Canadian. Which I love. And I'm trying to get more Canadian content out there. So you can go into my YouTube channel. It's going to be in the sidebar here, or it's going to be in the Twitch chat. So my YouTube channel will be there, and you can follow me on Twitter, of course. I'm taking a Twitter break right now. But I will be back in like 3 weeks. So to meme and fuck around and all that good shit. So my Twitter is in the chat too. You can find it there. My most recent video, if it is of interest to you, is a very, very brief, but also like decently in-depth discussion about the different kinds of conservatism in Canada, how it kind of like compares to the American style of conservatism, just describing like how it's different and stuff like that. If that's something that interests you, feel free to subscribe to me. And yeah, and man, conversations about sexual ethics with like people on Twitch, just like I'm a pretty moderate guy, okay? Like here's the political compass, okay? I'm like right around here somewhere. And then it's like whoosh right over here when we talk about sexual shit.
Which way is that for you? Conservative or I actually couldn't tell?
Auth-right. I was going auth-right there. Anyway,
okay.
So,
all right.
I don't know how that showed up on the stream.
Exactly.
But anyway, yeah. So yeah, that's an exaggeration, of course.
But then he hears about daggering and it like blows his mind.
I don't even know what the fuck that means, and I don't want to know. So,
all right.
When you shove a dagger in someone's ass, is that what that is? You stab someone in the ass with a dagger? Is that what dagger is?
All right. Put him on a list, Franklin, please. Right? Put this man on a list. Let's go. Let's go to my man last username, right? The good kind of Canadian, right? A credit to his kind. Last username. Thank you for coming through and being as disagreeable as you usually are. So last username, tell a bit about yourself.
Yeah, I wish people would disagree with me more. That's kind of what I was hoping for. But whatever, good talk. Check me out, last underscore username on Twitch, and Econarchy on YouTube. Search for it. Yeah, I don't know much more to say. Always a pleasure, Prime. Good talking to all you.
Thank you. All right. Next, we have Problematic Pan, right? His proper form, right? His final form, really. Pan, thanks for coming through, being part of this.
Yeah, I hope it's not my final form. Hopefully I continue to evolve throughout the rest of my life, Prime. I don't want to be the same man I was, 5 years ago. But regardless of who I am in the future, you can follow me at twitch.tv/problematicpan or on Twitter. It's up to you. Yeah.
Okay, it's up to you. Then don't. All right. Next we have our Dark Lord and Savior. Oh God, DB. I feel like this has been an escalation, right? I feel like today we have learned some things that would be used against you in a court of law. Like, so please never get arrested, my friend, because these VODs will absolutely come up that for like a character evidence. So DB though, thank you for sharing, right? Inadvisedly, but thank you for sharing.
I forgot to make this clear earlier, but you keep mentioning how many Canadians there are on the panel, and I'm not Canadian. I'm absolutely not fucking Canadian. Just FYI. Secondly,
that's absolutely the case, right? Because I wanted to make sure we had North American representation, right? So I had some Canadians, I got some Americans, and I brought you on as our Mexican. So thank you.
I fucking hate you. Okay, so then to be very clear, I did finger those women in self-defense. I'm Doobie. I help run the politics server on Discord, discord.gg/politics. You'll find me there if you want to yell at me about things.
Absolutely. Okay. Next, we will go to Corey Campbell. Corey, thank you for coming through. This was a lot of fun. It's Corey. Always. Every time he agrees to come on, right? He gives me like this long thing about how he's about to come on. But usually I mistake it because when people write a lot, when I see them writing a lot, right, that means like they're gonna tell me no, right? And tell me all the reasons why they can't come on, right?
Oh,
but yours is like all the reasons that I really want to be here. So it's a nice change of pace.
Well then, in that vein, thank you so much, Prime, again, for reaching out and inviting me on. Super appreciate it. And also grateful to be on with Doobie, Pan, last username, Layman, Black American Maid, Franklin, and Erudite. Great conversation. Much appreciated. I'm Corey Campbell. You can find me on Twitch, Corey Campbell84. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Literally, it's Corey Campbell. I'm a biochemist. I cover science. I cover research, and a little bit of politics. And actually, I know what you're doing, Prime, based off of our last panel last week. You're preparing your defense for when you beat your children. I'm keeping that in mind.
You're talking about spanking?
Yep.
Okay. Damn.
Wait, you have kids?
Yes.
We are all Prime's children.
I was gonna say Pan is Prime's child.
And guess who the Dami Mommy is? It is our good friend.
Is that where you get his
I
fro
never
from?
thought I'd meet my parents.
Bam, holy shit. I don't know if anyone heard that. Yeah, my name is Not So Erudite. Thanks for having me, Prime. You can find me everywhere, excluding Cozy TV at Not So Erudite. Yeah, I do some fun stuff, dating shows. I did a cosplay the other day, so get your brains ready, I guess. So yeah, lots of fun stuff coming up.
Hey,
Yeah.
including a BDSM outfit, right? She's promised, right? She won't go back on it. Thank you so much, seriously though. And then last but not least, our new friend, Franklin, who added a whole bunch, right, to this panel. It would not have been as good without you. You gave us a lot of deep insight into Canadian law, right? So I actually really appreciate it. It was fascinating. And I learned stuff, right? I'm not gonna remember because fucking can't. I don't give a shit. But like, thank you for enriching myself and my audience.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm Franklin and Slash. I do streams. I mostly talk about the law. Sometimes it's Canadian, sometimes it's American. That's when I get into trouble because I don't know. You have weird states and shit. But like, yeah, I'm super happy that I got to come on the panel and talk about Canadian law. Yeah, you can find me Franklin and Slash everywhere. Twitter, Frank and Slash. So yeah, and I wasn't streaming this, but I'm gonna start streaming because it's super great. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so we're gonna move on to open walk on panel. Anyone here? Oh, sorry, DB. Yeah.
I just want to thank Franklin and Lactoid, and I feel like recently we've had a lot of lawyers come around because of the Roe v. Wade stuff, and a lot of them have like really reinvigorated my trust in the legal system, because I didn't think it was possible for there to be a lawyer that wasn't a douchebag. You guys are awesome.
I would agree. Actually, these ones that have come through have actually been really, really awesome. Oh, sorry, but you didn't include Pisco into.
I said not a douchebag.
Canadian is the difference, probably the difference maker.
That is the difference.
Is Lactoid Canadian?
Absolutely.
He's like a Virginian or some shit.
It's
Right?
American.
No.
I'm claiming
there you go.
Okay.
It all makes sense now.
Yeah. But I love you, Pisco. All right. And that's you only need me, right? So thank you all. We are gonna go to a walk on panel right after this. Anyone here is welcome to join us, but if not, that's okay. Thanks for spending your time, your energy, your knowledge, and your passion in my community. I know they appreciate it just as much as I do. Have a good one. Bye.
Goodbye. I'm using two hands.